Morning, everyone. Good morning, Excellencies. Morning, Oscar.
Good morning, DSG. Welcome and thank you, Oscar. And I can vouch for Oscar that his team and him have been on the job and working very hard. And well, now that the DSG is there, and I know that you are pressed for time, Amina. So we will start immediately. So welcome everyone. I thank you. I'm so happy to see so many of familiar faces, and everybody seems to be holding pretty well. It's a very peculiar. It seems sometimes we want to act normally, but the situation is nothing but normal. So thanks for being here and participating. And I think it's an important topic, and I think it's important for the PBC and for the UN that the discussion we're going to have today, we're going to start today. So I'll be very brief. As Oscar said, well, there will be a little bit of a change. It's going to be a shorter number of briefers, but we'll have Amina will brief us first on what she's been doing and the UN has been doing, and some of her comments and observations, and she's been doing a lot and with the team, and thank you for your leadership. And then we'll have Dominic Burgeon who is the Directors of Emergency at the FAO, and then we'll have Frank Bousquet, who is at the World Bank. He's a Senior Director of Fragility, Conflict and Violence at the World Bank. And then we'll have people from the floor coming in. And the reason why, we wanted to start this discussion of the Peacebuilding Commission. It's actually, yes, of course, discuss the COVID-19 situation, that it's more than a health crisis, that it affects all of humanity and calls for an inclusive and people-centered response, and that we need international solidarity, including economic solidarity in response to this crisis. And there's an urgent need for us to work together to limit the spread and impact of the virus and potential accompanying political, social, and economic shocks. And I must tell you that I laugh a bit when I see that they have some problems agreeing at the Security Council on the fact that it's not they act like as it seems that it's not a threat to security. In my mind, it is. And I think the PBC's work is essential in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we must show determination in accompanying conflict-affected countries in their mitigation, prevention, and recovery efforts. We hope that this discussion will set the stage for additional, today it's actually, we're going to go wider, and then we hope that we will be able to go more precise discussion as we go along on some specific topics or some regions and some country-specific discussion as well. For example, I can tell you that the SRSG Chambers has already agreed to brief on implications for peacebuilding and sustaining peace in West Africa and Sahel. So we'll have another meeting with him. And also, the PBC needs to continue to work on its existing commitment in support of Burkina Faso, Gambia, Liberia, and other countries on its agenda. And the crisis calls for immediate adjustment of existing plans and an even stronger support to national peacebuilding efforts. I think that ever before. So let's go immediately on the discussion. What I want you to do and I'll come back to you about after the briefers, is the briefers will give you a taste of a variety of views of what's happening and what measures are being taken. And I want us to think about it in a way that we can think about how the PBC can be helpful in some of these discussions in the future, and how can we be helpful to get results on the ground. And this is I just want to tell everyone that this is an open briefing. This would normally, I just need to remind you that this will normally be brought a webcast as an open meeting of the PBC. So we will be recording the meeting and posting the video on the PBSO website for interested observers. So all of this, let's go immediately. Deputy Secretary General, Amina, you have the floor. Thank you for being with us.
Me. I'm muted.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much, Excellencies and colleagues, and I hope that you and everyone in your families are okay during this really trying time, if not the pandemic, the new way of working, which really has put a considerable amount of stress on many families. And so I hope that everyone's well. Thank you very much, our Chair of the Peacebuilding Commission, Marc-André, for this initiative, and the members for stepping up to the immense challenges that we have ahead of us with this global pandemic. It is undoubtedly surreal times. It evolving so fast, we've never experienced this, and yet we are seeing many gaps in collective leadership with a common purpose, and that in itself gives us food for thought. And what does this look like post-COVID? So I really appreciate the time that will be spent on discussing these issues at the Peacebuilding Commission. I'm also really happy to see our colleague from the World Bank, Frank Brusquet, amongst us. Our partnership is going to be critical as we support countries in this unprecedented global crisis. And we have a meeting with the bank and its MD and vice presidents this afternoon to talk again about how we can consolidate our efforts at the country level. Of course, Marc-André, you've talked about COVID-19 as a human crisis, and we all talked about the global nature of it, not needing a passport to go anywhere. It is crossing borders fast, and it will have huge implications across all aspects of human life, as we are continuing to see more analysis done, more scenarios and modeling. It is quite alarming. We're also seeing a health emergency spreading across the world. I mean, this has been a call from WHO from day one, but it's increasing in the number of countries that we are across the world that we are seeing. It is also facing humanitarian emergency, causing additional stress and suffering for the world's most vulnerable. COVID coming now did not put a stop on climate change. It did not put a stop on those suffering within the conflicts and some of the crises that we see, humanitarian crises that we're seeing now, as we hear the leadership in Kenya warning us of the second wave of the locusts, which will cause even greater harm to livelihoods and people. The crisis is turning into a development emergency. We're amplifying, which really is amplifying the gender gap and already pervasive inequalities. It's just showing up all that we have said and known, but even more so now. And it does risk reversing hard-won development gains and make the promises of the 2030 agenda quite elusive. The political implications are clear. Across the world, we're seeing worrying signs of political and social unrest. In Italy, in Spain, in Chile, in parts of Africa and Asia, and this is worrying. Health systems crumble and institutions are unable to cope with the immense socioeconomic implications. The social contract that we have will see further erosion. So we really need to act now, and we need to act together and in a much more integrated way. There should not be a scenario of either or. We cannot choose to deal with the health emergency alone or prioritize the humanitarian response alone, because we can't expect people to choose between hunger and their health. This should not be a choice. We should have it all. As the Secretary General has stated, if we do not confront the pandemic and its consequences simultaneously, the virus will continue to run like wildfire, taking lives and affecting people and threatening our social cohesion. While countries in the north have got greater capacities to make the necessary investments in health, social protection, as we've seen, and injecting resources into the economy, they must ensure that developing countries as well have those opportunities. And I know that those discussions are ongoing, but we would like to put urgency around the ambition that is needed if we are to have the same responses needed for the crisis in our countries. In countries and regions where conflicts continue to rage, of course, time is not on our side, and again, underscoring the urgency of the response. COVID has shown how swiftly it can move across borders that devastate our countries and governments and bringing life to a standstill. In the end of the day, if the virus remains active somewhere, we cannot be safe anywhere. It's why on the 31st of March, the SG called launched a global call for solidarity to help countries suppress the transmission of the virus while mitigating the devastating socio-economic impact of COVID. And our strategy is calling on looking to build the world back better. Following the SG's call, the development system's finalizing a development of a global framework to foster an integrated and agile response by our country teams. Again, we are seeing that the fruits of our labor, member states, and the system in getting the reforms off the ground is already being tested. We have succeeded in seeing incredible leadership of the country teams with WHO in the response on the pandemic plans, but we've also seen this coming together of the different strands where the humanitarian, health, and socioeconomic piece understanding this is one response that we need to make. For the first time, the emergency nature of the health and humanitarian is being felt in the development side of the house. The framework that we have is built off the report that the SG put out. It is one in which we not only engage the UN system, but our partners, because this is a collective effort at the country level. It will complement and leverage the action by our partners, including the World Bank and other funding instruments of the UN. And we're working closely with PBSO to ensure that investments are coordinated with the Peacebuilding Fund to generate the synergies. And I want to thank especially Oscar, because he has given an enormous amount of input to help shape that nexus and to help ensure the cohesiveness of that response at the country level, taking profit of the opportunities from this crisis. Things that we could not have done otherwise, we now have the opportunity to do, and showing how we can do that better. Of course, as we face COVID-19, sustainable development goals, the Agenda 2030, it really does remain, I would say, the rudder, because these seas are pretty choppy, they're pretty rough in places, and I think that framework does keep us grounded. We will have to think about what happens to consumption. We will be still looking at the opportunities of the energy transitions, jobs, inequalities that are showing us how bad this is, even as we look to the access of the effects of the pandemic are cutting across sectors and demand an equal comprehensive response. And it goes both ways. If not suppressed swiftly and universally, it will exacerbate conflicts and political tensions. And as countries fight the pandemic, conflicts are a major bottleneck to any effective response. And we see challenges will be compounded in the humanitarian and conflict-affected settings. Let me just digress here a little. It was really interesting to see that we have a very complex situation in Syria. And yet, when I spoke with the RC the other day, he said the urgency to confront and to try to address COVID was bringing back the opportunities for investing in strengthened healthcare systems and access to water and sanitation. This would have been much more difficult pre-COVID. Post-COVID, we're now reaching people on issues that have long been essential for them, but with COVID, it is underscoring the importance of it. We count on a positive response to the SG's call for a global ceasefire. Really happy to see many countries that are signing on and continue to do so. It is, again, an opportunity from a crisis in silencing the guns in many places. But we also have made that call to lifting sanctions. We've made another call where we are saying it is incredibly important that the supply chains are kept open, reinforced, and are fit for purpose and able to deliver when and where they're needed at the quality that everyone should have, and not different levels for different countries. We want to express our appreciation to member states, regional partners, our non-state actors, especially civil society, religious leaders, are huge influencers in the messengers that we have. And I think this is really getting behind the ceasefire. It's going to be incredibly important for us. We need to use this difficult time wisely, reassess the responsibilities we have. I think also give some reflection to the division of labor, because as we say, global response requires every one of different parts of the society stepping up. What does this mean in countries where we no longer have the same human interaction? It is taken into this virtual reality. It's easier said than done to actually engage and get work done. And I think here, business and the private sector, young people, entrepreneurs, all have skills that are quite amazing, and we should deploy them. We should get them working and not talk about just having them round the table, but that division of labor. Get those who know how to do it best out in front, and address the challenge and the urgency that we need. So we do need to do much more together, keep a focus on the human face of the crisis, particularly our women, and prevent the reversal of the many gains that we have had in peace and security. While we always ask for more, we must remember that we have had gains. The Peacebuilding Commission, it's a linchpin sitting right at the nexus between peace and development, and will continue to have, if not the same role, more of a role in helping to shape the world beyond COVID. It does need, and always Oscar's voice has been very strong in helping to connect the dots across the UN bodies. That's been important because it's a thread where there is no argument to peace and stability. And therefore, I think your voice being even louder today to ensure that we are anchoring all the efforts we have within human rights, institutions being more responsive. I say strong, but I think more responsive because there is a trust deficit there, and we need to recognize that and address it. To pay much more attention to our social cohesion, the fabric of our societies, where there are not strong communities has really been tested. And we are seeing in our developed countries huge issues of gender-based violence, and much more importantly, the mental health piece. And that does have, of course, an impact on our societies. And then, as I said, greater equity and justice. Every single country in the PBC agenda will need our support in financing the health emergency and its ramifications. Again, thank you very much to the chair for making an opportunity to discuss the economic piece and financing later in the week. But it will, in some cases, look for adjustments in our strategies. Countries will need to have more support faster and at greater scale. This is a conversation we're having with the bank. How can we make that happen? We have amazing support in our crisis countries from the bank. And how can we do this better on development, where we're looking at cash transfers, we're looking at online education, things that need to go to scale, not that we don't know how to do them, but at the scale and the speed that is needed. And so, again, if ever there was a time to renew our commitment to our strong partnerships, to financing, to all the issues we have, human rights, humanitarian action, particularly peace building and mediation, let's do that, committing and investing in hope, solidarity, and building back for all people in our world. So thank you very much, Marc-Andre. It is amazing to see everybody again, and we seem to be mastering the virtual space, and I hope that we can continue to get the feedback and work on the feedback from important meetings like this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Amina. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have you with us. Before you leave, I'll use my chair's privilege. If you had one or two advice for us as the Peacebuilding Commission on things we should be doing in the coming weeks that could be helpful to you, what would they be?
I think the first is getting the narrative right, that we're not working in silos. I think that that's not clear to people when we are hearing from donors, we're hearing from different stakeholders of what is it that you want us to do and how to respond. So I think getting that narrative right of that, that we are not, humanitarian is in one place, peace building is another, development is another, how we are coming together and accentuate the importance of it happening at country level. I think it's essential that that happens. And then I think that the voices of our friends need to be louder. We tend to speak to the choir, and I think we need to be out there. I know it's difficult for our leaders right now, but where leaders cannot come together with a common statement, they can end up with a chorus that is common. If each and every one of them in the messaging that we're giving for the importance of peace and the nexus issues and the importance of that acceleration. So I think your voice as well is going to be incredibly important right now. There's a vacuum there. In terms of having a voice that everybody's waiting for is waiting for someone to lead, but, you know, frankly, a group to lead. I think that your voices are very important to the leaders who are in the Peacebuilding Commission.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful and inspiring, really, it is. And I mean, I just want to say on a personal basis, you've been everywhere in the last few weeks, and just be careful. We need you, and we need you in good health. So thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you for your leadership. And we're all there with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I mean, without you, we would not be doing, nor would we be inspired to do the work that we do. So thank you so much, Marc-André.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Be safe. Be safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So now I'll ask Dominic Bergeon from Aubergeon, from the Director of Emergency and Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. So Dominic, can you have the floor?
Yes, thank you very much. Unfortunately, you cannot see me because my bandwidth is too low, so I have to choose between the image or the sound. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for inviting FAO to participate in this very timely meeting of the Peacebuilding Commission. And we would like also to wish all the best to all of you and your families, of course, in these difficult moments. As you know, FAO, together with WFP, UNICEF, WHO, and IFAD, publishes on a yearly basis the state of food security and nutrition in the world, that is talking of basically chronic food insecurity. Together with a number of partners, we also publish on a yearly basis the Global Report on the Food Crisis. And last year, Global Report on Food Crisis reported that over 113 million people were actually experiencing acute food insecurity, the type of food insecurity that requires humanitarian assistance and that could potentially lead to famine if not attended to. And from your perspective, what is interesting is that basically 2/3 of these people were in context affected by conflicts and instability. The 2020 edition of that report that we are going to release in the coming few days will show, of course, a comparable trend, and again with conflict as the primary driver of acute food insecurity. Last week, I participated in the 6-monthly meeting of the Food Prevention Network for West Africa, which is called the RPCA. And from that report, from that meeting, it is clear that conflict and instability in some part of the region, particularly in Lake Chad, Liptako-Gourma, and northern Nigeria, has sharply pushed up level of acute food insecurity. In the upcoming clean season, June to August, some 17 million people in West Africa are expected to experience acute food insecurity. This is a massive deterioration compared to last year. What is clear also in that in many fragile countries, we have high levels of acute food insecurity driven by conflict-related crises. Millions of people are on a knife edge and extremely vulnerable to shocks such as COVID-19 and related containment measures. If the informal economy, trade, and the supply of humanitarian assistance are interrupted or completely halted, there will be no doubt a further deterioration. It is also important to keep in mind that health and food security objectives are closely intertwined. Health-related impact of COVID-19, such as, for example, incapacity to work for extended period of time or death of place additional pressure on people whose livelihood and incomes are already depleted. On the other hand, as access to nutritious food declines, so too will vulnerable people's health. Farmers' inability to timely access agricultural inputs, but also to access markets to sell their produce. Falling purchasing powers among pastoralists due to unfavorable terms of trade, soaring unemployment and deteriorating purchasing powers among urban population, and thus reduced access to food could no doubt fuel violence and instability, as was the case, for example, during the food price crisis in 2008, as you may remember. In particular, we would like to flag the situation of transhumant pastoral population. which are likely to be hard hit by any border closure or even by within country movement restriction, as they rely on seasonal movement of livestock for their food and income. The disruption of traditional transhumance patterns and the creation of new ones may lead to tension and even violent conflict between resident and pastoralist communities. Lack of opportunities in rural areas and in the informal economy may also increase the risk of youth enrollment in armed group, which cannot be ruled out as a negative coping strategy. If food supply chains become disrupted and livelihood untenable, vulnerable populations are also more likely to move in search of assistance. Such movements will further threaten the spread of the virus and increase social tension and undermine livelihoods. So what can we do to do that? First and foremost, we think that COVID-19 response needs to take into consideration local conflict sensibilities and need to be trust of local communities. Keeping open critical food supply chains and humanitarian assistance corridor will be of vital importance in the response to the virus, as well as stabilizing people income and access to food, recognizing that many of the vulnerable people have no or very limited access to social safety nets. Also considering that in countries with pre-existing high level of food insecurity, up to 80% of the people depend on agriculture for their livelihood, safeguarding livelihood and food systems now could help protect gains in terms of peace building and avert further deterioration of conflict at local level. We will need to anticipate as much as possible. For that to happen, and in order to adapt and scale up livelihood saving support where it is needed the most, we must have better understanding of the evolution of the pandemic and emerging impact on different populations. FAO, together with WFP and other partners in the context of the Global Network Against Food Crisis, will work to understand the impact. We'll work more with IGAD and other sub-regional organizations to strengthen data analysis and be able to target response where we see the situation deteriorating. In particular, given the time sensitivity of food production activities, we must work together to ensure that livelihood saving assistance is provided to small-scale producers, prioritizing ongoing and upcoming planting season. This is something that was clearly flagged during last week's meeting on West Africa, that meeting the next planting season in the Sahel, for example, that is starting in May, June, will be critical. In the meantime, social safety nets where they exist or cash distribution will be key for the worst hit family to cover their immediate needs. We know from experience that livelihood intervention can have a sustainable impact on peace, particularly at local level, and especially where they are implemented as part of a broader set of multi-sectoral humanitarian development and peace-related interventions. For example, with the Peacebuilding Fund, FAO works together with partners like IOM in support of transhumant population and in support of community-based conflict management activities in contexts such as the Sahel and Central Africa. And this work is showing impact in terms of increasing social cohesion and livelihood outcome. We think, and we would like to flag, that sort of work needs to be scaled up considerably and expanded to new contexts. Our goal must be to ensure that every single household is able to cope with the disruption brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. This needs to include a strong focus on supporting women and promoting activities that take place within the confines of the households, like home gardening and small livestock rearing. This crisis is an opportunity to invest in local actors, but it is also making their work harder. Local actors will keep humanitarian operations moving during lockdowns and restrictions and make sure assistance reaches those most in need. Yet, informal groups, like many of the local conflict management mechanisms with which we as FAO are working in fragile context are struggling to continue in the face of restrictions on gatherings. FAO is exploring how best to maintain support to this, as they are also likely to be some of the more trusted stakeholders to transmit messages, raise awareness on COVID-19, and act quickly to resolve potential violences emerging from genuine grievance as a result of the pandemic. We are exploring a variety of solutions, of course, considering that people cannot meet, that it is a challenging factor. Therefore, we are working, for example, with community radios, etc., to make sure that we continue the messaging. In conclusion, it is clear that it is going to be complex, and yes, the impact will likely be long-lasting. But we have to acknowledge that a lot of work has already been done and relations built, especially in the context of programs we have, for example, with the Peacebuilding Fund, with even Canadian funding that I need to salute. We need to keep maintaining this, supporting the most vulnerable people as much as we can. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would like to give you back the floor.
Thank you very much, Dominique, for this. Merci beaucoup. And are you staying with us? Can you stay with us for the to listen to what the member states will say, and then maybe ask you a few questions? Dominique, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, my line is unstable. Can you please repeat your last point?
I said, are you going to stay with us, or you have to leave?
Can you please repeat? Yes. No, definitely. I'm going to stay with us.
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
going to stay with you.
So we'll go to the end for the questions and comments. Okay, thank you very much for that. That was very enlightening. And
thank you,
Frank, now I want to go to the World Bank, to go to completely another view of this. The World Bank has made some announcements, and Frank, who is the Senior Director, Fragility, Conflict and Violence for the World Bank, please tell us what the World Bank is doing, but also, I mean, one comment that I have before is how, everybody's asking themselves, how will country access that money quickly, and what can they be doing to do that? I get that question all the time, so I don't know if you can answer some of it in your remarks. So Frank, you have the floor.
Many thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Excellent. Well, first, many thanks, Mr. Chairman, Ambassador Blanchard. It's a pleasure to see you again virtually. But also, I would like to say that my intervention, to some extent, will not be a totally different view. I think Deputy SG made very good point about the link between fragility, conflict, violence, and COVID-19, and I will come back to it. So I do think that we have the same approach in many aspects. So once again, Mr. Chairman, Ambassador Blanchard, Your Excellencies, I would like to thank you for this meeting. I think it's extremely timely. With the diverse challenge that posed by the pandemic, whether it's health, human capital, economies, to marginalized people, require indeed a global coordinated response with strong collaboration between the World Bank Group and the UN system to support government. And as mentioned already by Deputy Secretary General, we have been closely coordinating with the United Nations systems, and there will be actually in 2 hours another coordination meeting with the head of UN agencies and our senior management. So yes, just to brief you, the World Bank Group is taking broad but also fast action, and I think Ambassador Blanchard, the point that you made was very important. It's not a question of making commitments, it's a question of delivering fast. And I think this is exactly what we have tried to do to help developing countries strengthen their pandemic response and healthcare. So we put together already a major program that went to the board last week, $14 billion fast track package to respond to immediate COVID-19 health and economic needs. and then also up to $160 billion in financial support over the next 15 months. So that's another important aspect, with an emphasis on protecting the poorest households and the environment, but also helping countries access critically needed medical supplies by reaching out to suppliers on behalf of government. I think it's very important to go beyond the financing itself. So we have launched already the first set of emergency support operations to save lives, detect, prevent, and respond to COVID-19 in developing countries. The first group of projects, which I mentioned before, totaling $1.9 billion, will assist 25 countries. That's the one that was approved by the board last week. And new operations are already moving forward in other 40 countries. And in addition, we are also working to redeploy resource in existing portfolio, meaning in existing World Bank finance projects across every region. The immediate World Bank Group support will assess the needs, prioritize the poorest countries, those with high risk and low capacity, and those in fragile conflict settings. Our projects are really, again, emphasizing strengthening the health system, increasing disease surveillance, improving public health intervention, and helping the private sector continue to operate and sustain jobs, which was also mentioned by Deputy Secretary General very rightly. Our support has been indeed to focus the most vulnerable, and this includes those living in fragile and conflict affected settings. And this is why this meeting today that you are chairing is so important. Under phase one of our programmatic approach, Afghanistan, Gambia, Haiti, Liberia, West Benghazi, Yemen are fragile and conflict affected countries, and they are already being supported. I would like to mention, for instance, a 26.9 million IDA grant to Yemen that is being implemented in partnership with WHO to help limit the spread and mitigate the risk associated with COVID-19. But also, for instance, $100 million in Afghanistan that will help to slow and limit the spread of COVID-19 through enhanced detection, surveillance, laboratory systems, as well as strengthen the essential health care delivery and intensive care. Now, this is about the World Bank response in full partnership with the UN system. But I would like also to mention that while the human toll of COVID-19 in FCV countries has thus far been limited, it's clear that the impact of the pandemic could be much greater in this context if it spreads. The pandemic could also compound existing risk and challenge, including active conflict and forced displacement, food insecurity. And it was so good to hear from Dominique from FAO, with whom we are partnering very closely, weak institutions and government capacity. So in short, this crisis may lead also to the emergence of fragility in new countries. The poorest and the most vulnerable countries, including those impacted by fragility, conflict, and violence, are likely to be hit the hardest by macroeconomic impact of the unfolding pandemic. And as already mentioned by the Deputy SG, the COVID-19 pandemic could also strengthen the fragile social contract that exists in many countries impacted by fragility, conflict, and violence. If governments, for instance, are unable to provide access to basic healthcare to citizens in the face of the pandemic, or if an already weak economic institution deteriorates even further, this could further exacerbate existing drivers of fragility, which could potentially escalate to further violence. I already briefed, as you may recall, the Peacebuilding Commission members, formally and informally, on the development of the World Bank Group first strategy on fragility, conflict, and violence. This strategy development, including consultation with government in every region and across the United Nations systems. It also provides the bank an operation framework and guidance how to design and implement programs in countries impacted by fragility, conflict, and violence. Preventing and mitigating FCV is central to achieving the SDG, which is very important. But it also supports the international community efforts to promote peace and prosperity as well, linked with SDG 16+. Accordingly, we recognize that it's critical to ensure that the response efforts to the COVID-19 crisis are adapted to the specific challenge facing FCV impacted country. In particular, how can we act quickly to support immediate health challenge while also ensuring response efforts are conflict sensitive and based on a clear understanding of the drivers of fragility and the source of resilience in a country, which is very important as well. COVID-19 could be especially perilous to forcibly displaced people who often lack access to health systems and live in overcrowded camps or in hosting communities that have already overstretched local health system. The World Bank Group has been and is working with, has been partnering and is working with international institutions and country authorities as well. With the IMF, we are calling on all official bilateral creditors to suspend debt payments from the poorest country so that they can concentrate their limited resource on the pandemic and its economic and social consequences. We're also encouraging other multilateral development banks and bilateral agencies to co-finance operations so projects can expand quickly. Our response is fully anchored in WHO COVID-19 Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan, which is of course critical. Our partnership, just to finish, with the United Nations is particularly critical to supporting government facing the pandemic in countries affected by fragility, conflict, and violence. Given the nature of the crisis, working across the humanitarian development peace nexus will be crucial. We have an opportunity to take advantage of each other's analytical and operational strength, and we can build on an existing solid partnership across the whole UN system. With PBSO for joint diagnostic, and I would like here to recognize the excellent partnership that we have with Oscar and his entire team. With humanitarian partners, including OCHA, WFP, and UNICEF, and with UNHCR for all the work on refugee and hosting communities, and last but not least, with all the peacekeeping missions like in DRC, Mali, CR, and others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Frank. And I presume, can you stay with us for the discussion?
Yes, I should be able to stay until 11:30, Ambassador.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll try to make sure that before you go, we have, if we have questions from you from the floor. So I have requests now from 3 countries, and I have requests from Egypt, Japan, and Korea. So I'll go with Mohammed, who is the PR from Egypt.
Good morning. Thank you, Marc-André. The voice is clear?
Yes, the voice is clear. We hear you well.
Thank you, Marc-André. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your leadership to the BBC at this hard time. And thank you for the presence of the DSG, and appreciate the effort of the PBSO under the leadership of Oscar and all distinguished briefers at this meeting. Of course, I'd also like to express full support and sympathy and solidarity with all those who are fighting this tough fight against COVID-19. Actually, peace building is an ongoing process. By nature, it happens at the backdrop of tough and stressful situations. And this, of course, is this time is a call for continued action. And I think this the effort of peace building is both a coefficient and a correlation to the toughness and the stressness of the situation. And currently, with the prevailing situation, the call for action is much more needed. Of course, this crisis is affecting all countries, developed and developing, and all the world is affected by it, but the impact is different and differentiated. And definitely, countries at stressful situations, countries at conflict-affected areas are suffering most, and we are facing dual impact. One is making the peace-building efforts more difficult, and another is risking losing the achievements which we were able to make in the peace-building track. Let me share also briefly some points which I think needs to be done at this time. I think that the PBC should continue to play its vital role in mobilizing the international attention and support to help the conflict-affected countries, and in maintaining its socioeconomic and humanitarian impacts, in mitigating the socioeconomic and humanitarian impacts, including through provision of medical aid, economic stimulus packages, and all what entails of relief procedures on the shoulder of the impacted countries. Also, PBC should explore with the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and other financial institutions ways to use all the instruments available in their arsenal to help mitigate against the scourge and provide relief to vital sectors of affected economies and communities. Also, PBC needs to foster a coherent and coordinated response to the COVID-19 pandemic in supporting conflict-affected countries through full utilization of its convening and bridging role within the UN system and with other relevant partners. And lastly, it's important to conduct a needs-based assessment in close coordination with the different relevant entities and with countries emerging from conflict to identify the areas where the PBC is best suited to focus on while avoiding fragmentation and duplication of efforts. And I just want to refer that at the African level, some measures have been put in place and proposed, and that happened through the African Union Bureau of Heads of States and Governments meetings lately, and it has proposed some mitigating measures for especially African countries and areas which are suffering most. And lastly, I want to say that this is a challenging time, and it could be either an opportunity to enhance our action or a missed opportunity. And of course, we should make it an opportunity rather than be a missed opportunity. Thank you much, Marc-Andre.
Thank you, Mohamed. Thank you very much for those comments. And now I give the microphone to the vice chair, so the ambassador of the PR and ambassador of Japan, Kimiro.
Hello, good morning. How are you? Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you, Marc-Andre, for your initiative, in pulling together this very important meeting today. Well, I also be very grateful to the very extensive briefing by Amina, Virgin, and Frank. Well, I think I echo many points which have been put forward by my Egyptian colleague, Mohammed. But here today, just let me make three concrete proposals. First, I think we should leverage, as Mohammed said, we need to mobilize international support. But I think, first of all, we should leverage the PBC's advisory role to the Security Council. All the more so since we are having this meeting before the Security Council is actually taking action. To begin with, we need to rally around the Secretary General's appeal for an immediate global ceasefire. Without ceasefire, assistance, including essential foodstuffs, cannot reach to the most vulnerable. The PBC should call on the Council to take action on this appeal. Moreover, COVID-19 is already affecting the operations of the UN missions, and I think is likely to have broader impacts on the communities they serve. The PBC should closely follow up on these situations and provide recommendations to the Security Council. Number two, second, I think, as Amina put it, we should not be in silos. So one thing I propose is we should identify the comprehensive picture of the ongoing and planned assistance, multilateral as well as bilateral, in specific at-risk country or countries. Well, for example, as part of the COVID-19 response, Japan, decided to provide an already dispersed $136.4 million for operations conducted by WHO and so forth in Iran and the surrounding countries, including countries affected by conflict. And yesterday also, we have adopted a supplementary budget proposal, including additional support through United UN agencies for approval by the Diet. We are hoping and sort of influx of assistance from various donors, agencies, and civil societies. Then, as everyone do agree, coordination becomes an issue. And this is something we always talk about, but it's very difficult to get done. We know that as someone who are involved in this sort of business. So we propose here to put all those assistance on the table in a transparent manner so that all of us, including implementing agencies, are able to see what everyone else is doing or going to do in a specific country. But please note, I'm not proposing to coordinate the efforts here at the PBC. It will just bring about confusions. Coordination is something that should happen in the field. under the leadership of someone who knows best the reality on the ground. So what PBC could do is to let various stakeholders compare notes and help the regional coordinator play a key role in the COVID-19 operation in his or her country. In the future, maybe PBC might ask the RC to assess this and report back to the impact of international assistance the country that received. My third and final proposal, PBC should compile best practices and examples on humanitarian development peace nexus. This is for what we are working. COVID-19 pandemic is causing human security crisis worldwide. And addressing this threat requires people-centered, multifaceted, and comprehensive approach, not limited to emergency public health response. In the context of peace building, as Amina put it, a holistic approach, and sustaining peace, I think humanitarian development peace nexus is all the more important. So I just wish to share two examples in which Japan is involved. Through the UN Trust Fund for Human Security, Japan supported multi-agency program in Liberia from 2014 to 17 to assist those regions hit by conflict and the Ebola outbreak. It helped strengthen the health system, empowered women in the agriculture sector, and ensured employment and food security in the affected communities. Also, Japan has providing continuous support for building peace in Mindanao in the Philippines. In early 2000s, Japan jointly founded with Canadian International Development Agency, Canadian Development Agency, and the World Bank, an integrated program to strengthen governance and institutions, as well as to improve people's livelihoods, including through improved delivery of healthcare to poverty-ridden, conflict-affected areas. So since the establishment of the Bangsamoro Transitional Authority in February 2019, Japan is providing assistance to sustain socioeconomic stability, including by providing reproductive health support and vocational training for former women soldiers, electricity to local healthcare centers, and water supply to the communities. You know, strengthening crisis response and improving equal delivery of healthcare services will help foster trust in national and local governments and build the foundation for peace. To build back and better, by the way, this word was coined, just after the Tohoku earthquake. Build back and better from our joint effort to overcome the current crisis. We should learn from our past experience and draw lessons from the ongoing struggle. I think the PBC has the potential to serve as a center of excellence in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very concrete proposal and suggestion, Kimiro. Lots of food for thought there and great. So let's go now to, I think, the DPR of Korea, the Republic of Korea. So, Park.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chair, for convening today's PBC meeting in a timely manner during this unprecedented and challenging time of all mankind. Today's briefing by the Deputy Secretary General, WHO, FAO, and other briefers provide us with comprehensive picture of devastating crisis we are collectively facing. So thank you so much. Today I would like to present to the PBC the lessons the ROK has learned fighting the pandemic over the past 3 more months, which in our assessment is when we overcame the worst phase. As such, I firmly believe that some of these lessons can also be applicable to a more vulnerable countries where the PBC is already deeply engaged. We call the Korean state strategy to fight against COVID-19 trust. First of all, is transparency. It consists of robust testing and trace with active civic participation. Secondly, responsibility of people. People need to strictly follow the guidelines from the government. This includes social distancing, taking personal sanitary measures, and volunteering to help community in need. Thirdly, it's about united action between public and private sector for preventing and containing COVID-19. I believe united actions could also apply to the coordinated effort by the PBC and its partners in the peace-building context. Fourthly, science and speed, which means active application of relevant technologies like self-diagnostic mobile apps for monitoring potential infection. Finally, working together in solidarity with international community. Critically, we stand against all xenophobia, discrimination, and gender-based violence, moving toward a bright and sustainable future where we can stand together recovered. I am confident that these guiding values, based on the principle of transparency, openness, and democracy, can be applied to the PBC's reaction to the impact of COVID-19 on peace building as well. The effective way forward to combat this pandemic lies on multilateralism that requires close cooperation and coordination among member states. In this regard, Korea is open to sharing its best practices, information, and lessons learned as appropriate with the entire global community, including the vulnerable countries. To that end, ROK government started to provide medical items, including testing kits, to developing countries to the extent that it does not affect supply and demand at home. And we will continue to participate in the global effort to curb the spread of this pandemic. Fundamentally, the PBC is a platform for discussion and resource mobilization. Therefore, I hope that based on country-specific information on each country's status and needs, the PBC will be able to undertake an advisory role to the Security Council and General Assembly to provide necessary help needed for the most vulnerable countries affected by this pandemic. In conclusion, given the nature of this contagion, we all know that no country is completely safe until every country is safe. While we should be mindful of supporting the Secretary General's appeal for an immediate ceasefire and COVID-19 humanitarian response plan of $2 billion, I hope the PBC continues to play its unique constructive role for the countries in most dire need. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So now I give the floor to Ambassador Fatima, the permanent representative of Bangladesh. Rabah, you have the floor. And if I may ask, we have I think everybody wants to talk. So if I or most people, if you want to just maintain your remarks to a minimum, that would be helpful and allow us to give the floor to everyone that is requesting the floor. The list is very long. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc-André, and I'll not have the camera on because the connection here is not bad, but I can see you all. Thank you very much. And I thank you for convening today's meeting and for sharing. And I also thank DSG, AFG Taranko, and the representatives of FAO and World Bank for sharing important updates and valuable perspectives with us. Mr. Chairman, the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting our societies and our lives in an unprecedented manner. And as we are already witnessing, this will have serious impact on our economies and our development gains. And we also have real concern about its impact on our hard-earned gains in peace building and sustaining peace. This is clearly a testing time. This is clearly a testing time for the PBC, as it is for all other UN organs, but I'm happy to see that under your leadership, PBC has started off early and is preparing to respond to this crisis within its mandate. And we strongly believe that PBC would have an important and relevant role to play as we address this global crisis. I will respect your verdict, Mr. Chairman, and will just reiterate actually a few brief points. Mr. Chairman, countries with fragile contexts are especially vulnerable and can aggravate further from the global risk of the pandemic. Keeping this in mind, we strongly support the SG's call for a global ceasefire, which aligns with the mandate of the PBC for peace building and sustaining peace through resolving ongoing conflicts and supporting peace processes. The Secretary General's call for the global ceasefire cautioned about the uncertainties the pandemic has created in conflict settings, which may potentially lead to a spike in violence. The PBC, we believe, can complement the efforts being undertaken following the SG's call, and the immediate work that PBC can embark upon is to help build on the entry points and facilitate the political momentum and political efforts being undertaken. PBC would need to remain closely engaged with the SRSGs, special envoys, and the UNCTs and all national stakeholders to bring the conflicting parties together, especially in the post-pandemic phase. And we believe it would also be important to coordinate closely with the peacekeeping architecture. And finally, Mr. Chairman, it is important that the peace processes in the countries under the PBC's agenda stay on course and are not overtaken or come to a halt due to pandemic-related priorities. It would be important to ensure that there is no diversion of resources from peace-building efforts during the pandemic period. And for that to happen, the PBC should enhance its engagements through country configurations and, if required, mobilize additional resources. I will join the call that an immediate needs assessment needs to be undertaken. The humanitarian development peace nexus is undeniable in this crisis, and national governments would need critical support to ensure that reconstruction and institution building efforts, particularly in the areas of reconciliation, transitional justice, etc., remain on track to the extent possible. And we believe PBC will have a critical role to play in this regard. Mr. Chairman, PBC's priorities should now be to sustain its gains and achievements and prevent a slide back. And you can count on our support as you steer the PBC during this challenging period. I rest my case here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, and please stay well. Thank you.
Thank you. The same for you, Rabah, and thanks for your comments. And now I'll go to Sierra Leone, the PR Ambassador Kaba. Ali, you have the floor.
Let me unmute here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Ali. Good to hear you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I want to commend you, especially given the tough situation we are going through right now. As someone who has seen you in action, I want to commend you for your astute leadership in chairing the Sierra Leone configuration of the PBC, and you assisted us to go through difficult periods. Let me start out by agreeing with everything I said, that the COVID-19 pandemic is already disrupted humanitarian aid flows, peace operations, and crisis diplomacy, and threatens, above all, the catastrophe for refugees and displaced people. It could damage fragile states, as we all highlighted, trigger unrest, and undermine international crisis management. The dramatic economic slowdown already underway has also disrupted trade flows and clearly created unemployment that will do damage at all levels that are hard to forecast and grim to contemplate. A global recession could take a particularly heavy toll on fragile states, where there is the greatest potential for unrest and conflict. In light of the aforementioned, the PBC can help mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on peace-building gains in the countries and regions under its consideration by using its overwhelming convening power to bring to the attention of key stakeholders such as donor countries, international financial institutions, relevant UN agencies, and regional and sub-regional economic institutions the dire situation of these countries. Furthermore, PBC can foster coherent, coordinated, and risk-informed responses to the COVID-19 pandemic from the UN system and partners in supporting countries affected by conflict by serving as a conduit point for gathering and disseminating relevant information between the countries under its considerations and other fragile countries in the UN system and partners as a whole. Mr. Chairman, the topic under discussion today, that is the impact of COVID-19 on peace building and sustaining, is one of the main areas or topics that the PBC is best suited to focus on without duplicating the effort of others. In addition, the PBC should focus on topics such as what would be the best way to ensure that countries do not relapse into conflict as a result of the socio-economic impact of COVID-19. Fragile countries like Sierra Leone will be hard hit by the pandemic, even though we have fewer than 10 cases today. The country's economic growth projection has been revised downwards to negative growth in a worst-case scenario. To put this into context, Sierra Leone's GDP was projected to grow by 4.2% this year. The total cost under this worst-case scenario is an estimated $379.5 million, with a financing gap estimated to be about $310 million. The main consequences of not addressing the impact of COVID-19 in Sierra Leone and other fragile countries would be the massive unemployment, especially among the youth, loss of livelihoods, and above all, a potential breakdown of law and order. Sierra Leone is still recovering from the effect of the Ebola crisis, and if necessary actions are not taken now to counteract the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic, there is a serious possibility that the peace that has prevailed in the country over the past 18 years will be threatened. We do not even want to imagine what that will look like as we move forward. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for this particular important and timely intervention, and I think will go a long way to bring attention to the needs of those countries that are in need of global solidarity at such a time. And let me thank Canada too for the support that you've provided in this global effort. Je vous remercie.
Merci, merci beaucoup, Ali. And pendant que nous parlons français, I'll ask Eric, the PR from Burkina Faso, Ambassador Thierry, to address us. Eric, you have the floor. Eric.
Let me congratulate you, Chair of the PBC and the others member, and the PBC Support Office for organizing this meeting in this particular time. I would like to thank the DSG, even she left, Mrs. Amina Mohamed, for her participation and for her very important communication. She advocated for us indeed. I also thank all the briefers, FAO, World Bank, and for the brilliant presentation, and other speakers who speak before me. Before I continue, I would like, on behalf of my government, to express condolences with countries and families who lost their loved one due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. President, Chair Member, I'm pleased to take part in this meeting, and it gives me the opportunity to recall that exactly 35 days ago, on 5th of March, the Commission held a meeting in Burkina Faso at the headquarters with the President of the Minister of Economy, Finance and Development of my country. At that meeting, the Minister presented the matrix of priority action of the emergency program for the Sahel in Burkina Faso for the period 2020-2021. He indicated that the budget of the implementation of this priority is about $378 million US, and from this amount, $176 million US was to be sought. At this financial gap to be sought is still topical and a priority. My government wishes to also to follow up on the March meeting, during which good intention of support to Burkina Faso were being expressed. Today, COVID-19 pandemic represents an additional serious concern for my country, already faced with enormous security and humanitarian challenge. Indeed, since 9th of March, Burkina Faso is one of the most affected countries in West Africa. At this time, I can say the situation as follows: 384 confirmed cases, 136 women and 248 men, 27 recoveries, and 19 deaths. The consequences of the pandemic on our population and our national economy are enormous. Ali speak about the growth. In our case, the reduction of the growth rate from 6.3 to 2% in 2020. In response to the COVID-19, the President of Burkina Faso addressed twice to the nation and as an important measure with the objective to stop and to support provision health, recovery of economy, and so and so. The national response plan adopted will be more than $656 million US, which representing 4.5% of the GDP. Mr. President, Burkina Faso is at a crossroad and therefore needs the support of the international community more than ever. I have no doubt that you will take the necessary steps to ensure that the Commission platform is used to mobilize resources to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, in conflict-affected countries such as Burkina Faso, taking advantage of coherent and coordinating international and regional assistance to support its plan in coordination with the entire United Nations system and all the partners. During the Ebola crisis, the Commission plays an important role and can build on the lessons learned and adapt them to the countries engaged with it, like Burkina Faso. In this vein, the PBF could support activities in national response plans that are relevant to the objectives of peace building. And in the event that a country has a strategy to emerge from conflict and to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, the Commission should encourage the use of national system and direct budgetary support. As I mentioned earlier, Burkina Faso has drawn up and adopted a matrix of priority action of the emergency program for the Sahel to address security challenge and a response plan in the fight against COVID-19. Burkina Faso therefore expects the Commission to mobilize partners to help fill the finance gap in the matrix and in the national response plan to the COVID-19. The financing of these two instruments will thus enable the country to cope with both insecurity and the pandemic. Mr. President, the COVID-19 currently dominates the news. For Burkina Faso, it should not make us forget the insecurity that caused many civilian and military victims and the situation of the internally displaced person who lives in the most difficult conditions. Preserving and consolidating peace are key for an effective fight against the pandemic. Indeed, one of the important measures to prevent the spread of the coronavirus disease is social distancing. How is this possible in view of the large number of internally displaced persons and or refugees who often live in crowded conditions? It is therefore important that the Commission ensure that peace-building aspects are taken into account in the response to the coronavirus and continue to bring the issue of peace building and sustaining peace to the multilateral, regional, national, and local level. The Commission could focus on the continuation and intensification of the implementation of projects aimed at preserving and consolidating peace, particularly in the area of social cohesion, peaceful conflict management, sustainable management of natural resources, organization and management of the return of displaced persons and refugees, and support for building their resilience. The Commission could also advocate and mobilize international support to countries in their post-COVID-19 recovery efforts. Given the global nature of the pandemic, this includes the resource mobilization for national economic recovery, plans and advocacy for exceptional measures being discussed to face this crisis, such as a debt relief for fragile countries and give a priority access to special funds being put in place by international institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, and the African Development Bank. Before I conclude, Mr. President, my country already fragile, I said my country is already fragile and affected, is paying a heavy price for this health crisis with all the rigorous measures taken to deal with. After having concentrated all effort in the fight against insecurity with nearly 25% of the budget, it is to be feared that all effort will be concentrated on the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, relating peace and security to the background. Therefore, Burkina Faso count on the PBC to mobilize resources to support its two plans, the emergency program for the Sahel and the national response plan to COVID-19. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Merci, Eric, and we're all in solidarity with you and what your country is facing. And it's 11:25 or approximately, and I think Frank or Dominic said that they would have to leave. At one of them would have to leave around 11:30. I think actually the plea that the ambassador made from Burkina Faso is actually a good moment to just pause. And I would say to you, Dominic and Frank, what do you have to answer to the ambassador of Burkina Faso? And what else? What are you doing? And what can you do to help him? And what should we do? Because that's a good test case for us. I mean, like if we fail in Burkina Faso, it's going to be the consequences will be gigantic. So Frank and Dominic, do you have any comments on that? And then not long, please, just a few minutes each. Thank you.
You want me to go first, or Dominic, you want to go?
Frank, now that you're there, start.
Frank, please.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, I think actually, Ambassador Blanchard, I think Ambassador from Burkina Faso is completely right at all levels. First, just to let you know that in Burkina Faso, we are actually putting together an emergency operation of $14 million, part of the package that I announced. That should go to the board shortly in the next few days. So for us, again, it's your point, Ambassador Blanchard, making sure that the response can move fast and not only making pledge for several months. The support needs to happen today. As I mentioned, those countries that are already having some pocket of fragility needs to receive special attention, because it's not only a question of health crisis, it's actually the broader link. We have seen actually in a number of countries, as you may know, a rise of violent extremism that have actually taken advantage of this vacuum of this crisis as well. So those countries, it's about providing support on the health side, on the macro financial support, but also making sure that we are focusing on the most vulnerable population. If you have the case, for instance, of Burkina Faso, the whole internal displacement is extremely important. It has raised from less than 50,000 IDPs in January 2019 to more than 830,000 in mid-March 2020. And that's really located about 50% in the center-north region. So I think it's also recognizing where we have pocket of fragility, where we have the most marginalized groups, and how we can make sure that those resources, the support, is also benefiting to all the different community, all the different marginalized population. Secondly, is actually to work jointly. In Burkina Faso, and it's good that we have PBSO and other colleagues here, we have done what we call needs assessment, recovery peacebuilding assessment, with not only our UN colleagues, with a leadership role from PBSO, but also with the EU, so that we can really understand what are the needs from a development perspective, but also from a humanitarian and security perspective, because it's not only about development. It's also making sure that we can help the government to strengthen the legitimacy of the institutions to deliver to all the population. So again, good example where coordination is extremely important, and I'm happy to report that we have actually joint diagnostic assessment with the UN and the EU system, leveraging what we call the three-party agreement, RPBA, Recovery Peacebuilding Assessment. And again, kudos to Oscar and his team with whom we are in close relation. That's a concrete illustration of the big principle I was mentioning before. But also second point, which is to say, it's not only about financing, it's also going fast. And that's why I was pleased to report on this operation of $40 million in the coming days that is going to benefit to Burkina Faso, but also making sure that it goes take into account the specific circumstance of those countries impacted by fragility, conflict, and violence. I just mentioned the issue of IDPs as one example. I will stop here.
Merci, François and Dominic.
No, thank you very much, and fully agreeing, of course, with what has been said by the ambassador, by Frank already. Of course, we are also very concerned by the deterioration of the food security situation in Burkina. As a matter of fact, last week, as I was saying, there was this meeting of the Food Crisis Prevention Network in West Africa and the Sahel, where it was reported that between now and the lean season, June to August, there will be an additional 500,000 people 1.6 to 2.1 million people in Burkina that are going to be facing acute level of food insecurity, therefore requiring food assistance and livelihood assistance. So for that we are fully mobilized, but yet I think what we are trying to do also is to indeed get a very good, and strengthen the assessment capacities to understand what is the actual impact and potential impact of the COVID-19 on the situation as a sort of aggravating factor, so that we can adjust the type of activities that will be supporting in the coming weeks and months, keeping in mind that one of the very critical activity that will have to take place in the coming weeks is support to the planting season. We are in that part of the world. The planting season will start very soon, and it's very important that we enable farmers to indeed plant wherever they can, whether they are still on their land, or even whether they are displaced and have access to some piece of land. So this is for us absolutely critical, and then to make sure that we protect as much as possible trade flows and the food value chains. I would like also to refer back to some of the comments that were made also before, especially by Japan and even by Bangladesh on the importance of partnerships. I think indeed when it comes to the humanitarian work. Yes.
It's
Hello.
We link to.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Your link is too weak now.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
With lots of difficulty now. We can hear you.
So I stopped. No, the line is unstable.
In 15 seconds.
No, in 15 seconds I was going just to highlight that.
That's fine. So
indeed the point that was made by several speakers on the importance of the HDP nexus. I think it's absolutely critical to preserve the gains that have been made, and also on the coordination side, and there also the HDP nexus type of coordination, which includes humanitarian, but also beyond humanitarian, and make sure that we work together is absolutely critical. It is also an opportunity in the current context to strengthen that. Thank you.
The HDP nexus is what? It's in peace nexus? That's what you mean?
Yeah, the humanitarian development peace nexus, yes.
We lost you.
Yeah.
So now let me go to the PR of Kenya.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Hello?
We can hear you well.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Macandre, for convening this important meeting, and for DSG, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, and our distinguished briefers for joining us this morning. My delegation too joins other speakers in commending you for this significant meeting, and for reports that we have so far received both from the Secretary General and various secretariat briefings. So far, we've had the impact of this pandemic is having on peace operations in mission settings and humanitarian efforts, particularly in refugee and internally displaced persons camps. Given the rapid increase or spread of coronavirus pandemic, local peace builders at the field level are also experiencing the impact firsthand and need concrete support to mitigate this human crisis, although we talk of the global health challenge, but it's a human crisis, and to strengthen resilience, particularly in the regions already experiencing fragility and conflict. In this regard, I would like to touch just but on 3 aspects of our topic for today, and one, namely on governance infrastructure, where there is, of course, a significant link between health and peace, but global health emergencies like Ebola of 2014, 2015, and right now COVID-19 have proved and have shown the significant impact they can have on critical governance infrastructure, especially healthcare systems, including personnel, policies, and social practices that need to be in place to allow effective mitigation. Mr. Chairman, access to health facilities and sustainability of social cohesion are crucial elements in easing tensions during this pandemic. But I'm more particular on what the PBC can do. PBC has an important role to play, and as a preventive measure, the Peacebuilding Commission is well suited to highlight and assess the potential impact of global health pandemics on state institutions, political stability, and long-term peace-building efforts. But of equal importance is that the Commission can also utilize its mobilizing mandate and bring in new partners and also energize existing partners in health and technology to support governments in designing smart systems and institutions in order to strengthen efficiency, preparedness, and state capacity to mitigate against the potential risks to fragile and peaceful societies. In this regard, speedy response is important, and especially in Africa now, as the Ebola creeps in as the latest region to be covered, the earlier the response, the better. At last but not least is the need, Mr. Chairman, that we need to strategize on the next phase, the political and socio-economic recovery. What does or what will a post-COVID-19 world look like for women, children, displaced, marginalized, and vulnerable community or populations look like in conflict-affected and fragile countries and regions? This requires integrated approach, and because of time, we'll be looking forward to PBC utilizing this capacity to be able to coordinate resources so that they reach needy areas on time. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lazarus. Thanks for the concrete recommendation. Now people want to hear the list that I have. It's a long list, but I have Switzerland, Ethiopia, Sweden, Ireland, Guatemala, Norway, Colombia, US, and Morocco. So this is the list that I have so far. So Jörg from Switzerland.
Thank you very much, Marc-André, and really thank you very much for having this meeting. I have heard a lot of things I agree with, and first of all, I really agree with everybody who said that the PBC has an essential role to play now, but also in particular, I believe in the aftermath of this crisis, also helping that this crisis really, above anything else, turns also into a peace and security crisis. And I also want to join those who said, for instance, the colleague from Japan, that the PBC should take its role as an advisor to the Security Council very seriously. I also feel that the PBC should use its flexible working methods and this hinge role. Oscar kept speaking about the hinge within the system that we have, allows us to initiate and support new ways of thinking and of acting within the UN system. Let me highlight maybe 3 areas where we see added value in the Commission's engagement. And as always, I'm much basing my thinking much on my experience as a configuration chair. First, Peace building and sustaining peace should really teach us to take a long-term approach and adopt also a holistic way of going forward, based very much on all the three pillars of the UN. The DSG talked about this nexus again this morning. This crisis really puts a great stress on societies and political system, and we must ensure that we keep our focus on fighting inequalities, on reducing vulnerability, on building resilience. Governments around the globe have to take difficult decisions and impose temporary measures to fight the pandemic, and our efforts to support countries in all dimensions of peace building remain key. For instance, we must remain attentive to the proportionality of the use of special emergency powers and the protection of human rights. We must react to early warning signs of outbreaks of violence, and we must assist institutions, national institutions, to provide basic services and return to their original modus operandi after as soon as possible. Second, it's been mentioned by a couple of colleagues, coordination is not just key for an effective support, but also necessary to avoid overburdening our partners at national and local levels. I think that's something we really need to look at. It has two sides. We need to bring the support, but also we need to make sure that on the receiving end, the governments, the local authorities, institutions are ready to receive what we are able to provide. So national governments have a major responsibility to foster trust in the institutions and agencies that are working to prevent the spread of the pandemic and to mitigate its impact. And I'll come back to that in a minute. I also feel, and it's been mentioned, civil society and grassroots organizations play an important role at the community level by educating, promoting social cohesion, and diffusing tension. As the pandemic puts stakeholders at all levels under stress, additional support is crucial. But this support has to be coordinated and aligned with national priorities. That's an experience we're making and time and again. And here again, I think that the PBC, including the county configurations, have a very particular experience, as we never talk or above the countries, and we never act above the countries' heads. We really work always with the countries concerned. Now, this is the point I really want to underline. This, I believe, is a two-way street. From the point of the international partners, we need to be very respectful and aware of the national sovereignty issues and of their national priorities. At the same time, from the side of the national authorities, they really need to also be welcoming, to be accepting that there is international expertise, there is international advice, and sometimes it's tough. They also need to be able to look or to go beyond national pride when they come to a point where they are by themselves not able to provide for the people. They need international help, and they need to really accept this. So this, I very much feel this needs to be a two-way street. And third, solidarity obviously is key in fighting the pandemic. We agree very much with the Secretary General that tailor-made strategies are needed. Solidarity does not only mean helping each other, it also means making a concerted effort to understand each specific context again and think collectively about how to tailor responses to local needs. These were my 3 points. And I really thank you again, Marc-André, for taking this up early. I believe the PBC has a very important role to play in this. Thanks for this meeting.
Thank you, Jörg. Now I give the floor to Tay from Ethiopia, the permanent representative of Ethiopia. Thank you, Tay.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, thank you, Marc-André, for convening this meeting. My thanks also goes to Deputy Secretary General Amina and Mr. Bergenen, as well as Frank from the World Bank. Well, the question here is, Mr. Chairman, you know, in view of what the Peacebuilding Commission can do, is that will this situation create a new strife and conflict? Will there be a relapse of conflict? Yes, indeed. The writing is in the wall. Desperate times will definitely lead to desperate measures. But likewise, could there be a breakdown of social cohesion and political instability as well? It is a possibility, because this pandemic has created, not in terms of, you know, the health predicament of our societies, but it has indeed robbed our resilience as human beings. On hindsight, will this predicament create greater collaboration and international solidarity? That's a possibility. It depends on the way we handle it. Having said that, I have three recommendations. The first one is that for PBC, you know, using its intergovernmental platform, the Commission can play a key role to strengthen coordination, coherence, synergies, and complementarities at the strategic and as well as operational levels, including between headquarters and the field, by reorienting resources of the for the tackling and combating the COVID pandemic. Secondly, the Commission could also play a vital role in making the COVID-19 the top priority of the United Nations principal organs, as you said it, Marc-André, in your introduction remark, and also inform field operation from the experience learned across the spectrum. You know, the UN Secretariat, the President of the General Assembly, United Nations institutions and agencies, WHO, UNDP, FAO, they are doing their level best, forging solidarity, making resources available to combat this pandemic. Equally, the world is also waiting for the Security Council to come up with a strong leadership. You know, during the Ebola outbreak in 2014, and as well as in 2018, when we were a member of the Security Council, 2018, we were able to write and, of course, pass resolution regarding, you know, the issues related to the threat of international peace and security as a result of the Ebola pandemic. That spirit, that's what we are expecting also from the Security Council. It is very, very important. Probably the third, my third and last point is that, you know, at the end of the day, everything is not gloom and doom. You know, we have to remember that proverbial saying that as human beings, we will definitely rise like the phoenix from the ashes at the end of the day. No question about it. But the PBC can help in building the narrative, the positive narrative. Has to be a strong voice for the much affected people out there, particularly in Africa. At the end of the day, we shall not lose lives, and above all, we shall not lose hope. But unfortunately, some in the developed world, I want to underline this point, are hell-bent in targeting our multilateral institutions and undermining their effectiveness in this challenging time. The only slide that we're looking at, WHO, is indeed an onslaught on our multilateralism and basic principles that we have been upholding for years. So we have said time and again, whatever this predicament and human suffering teach us is, this is the time to embrace solidarity, rethink new stewardship for our collective survival, and we need to rethink new stewardship for our collective existence. We cannot afford to be distracted. But having said that, finally, I would like to extend my thanks to World Bank, FAO. You are the first respondent, including the WHO, to many in the developing countries. Your support was indeed critical. It will help in saving lives. And thank you very much, Mark and Ray, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tay. Let's say just that I thank you for that comment, and I know it's not my role as a chair, but I'll digress a little bit. I agree with some of the points you've raised, and I thank you very much for raising them. I'll go to Sweden. Anna.
Marc-André, thank you very much for calling this important meeting, and my appreciation to the briefers. Let me just say that we strong support from our side for the leadership of the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General, the entire UN system in meeting the challenge of the COVID, and the flexibility that they have shown in adapting their activities and programs to the new situation. Marc-André, I know that we have little time, so I will make four very quick points, and in doing that, agreeing with a lot of what has been said before on the important role of the Peacebuilding Commission. First, that the Peacebuilding Commission is dealing and is engaged in many of the countries which are extremely vulnerable in this situation. I totally agree with the Secretary General on the importance of looking at Africa and urgent action when it comes to Africa. As many have said, we need to do preventive action. Food security has been mentioned, and I think what our colleague from Burkina Faso has told us is very important on the way of working also preventively, but also in the medium term and long term. Socioeconomic effects will be both acute, medium, and long term. And of course, as Jürgen Ade says, the importance of standing by these countries in solidarity, in building resilience and strong institutions. I think Kimi-Hiro has an important point also on our role as the PBC in vice in the Security Council, especially now when it comes to the initiative for the global ceasefire by the Secretary General. I totally concur with his proposal on an active role by the PBC there. Secondly, to emphasize the importance of a coordinated, coherent action by the UN system and by us as member states, and the importance of the office of the RCs and the UNCT, the country team in the UN. They play an enormously important role, but also the partnership PBC with the regional organizations like the African Union and the European Union. Third, gender. DSG alluded to this. We are seeing also in our societies as women are carrying an extremely heavy burden right now. They are responsible for caring for the sick, for education, for many of the important parts of society, and so we need to have a gender and right-based approach to our work, and we cannot leave women behind in this situation. They are often underpaid, without insurances, but playing an extremely important role in societies. And lastly, just to say that we should utilize the country-specific configuration, the country configuration to the maximum for specific discussions. And just to say that I intend to call a meeting on the Liberia configuration as soon as possible, and the importance of keeping the agenda there. For Liberia, the economic development is extremely important, and even more important as we are talking about the challenges as we are seeing today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna, for the recommendations. And I now, before I give the floor to Jonathan from the UK, on behalf of everyone, I think, Jonathan, I just want to tell you that the entire world is cheering for Prime Minister Johnson at the moment to get better and get better soon. And we're all with you in this. And also, I just want to also mention that I think all of us, the PRs and the members of the United Nations, are in solidarity and also cheering for our friend Martin, the PR of Argentina, who is actually also going through a very tough time. I've heard that the situation is still stable, but it's been an awful, for me, it seems like an eternity since he was in hospital, and it's awful. I want to say that at this same time that I was saying it for Prime Minister Johnson, I think we all have thoughts at the moment for Martin as well. So, Jonathan.
Well, Marc-Andre, it's James Roscoe here, the acting.
Oh, sorry, James.
I
thought it was Jonathan. Sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. And I just want to first of all thank you for those very kind words. We understand the Prime Minister is getting stronger, but remains in intensive care in London. And I will pass those sentiments back from you and from the BBC to London. So thank you very much. And we all have Ambassador Moretan in our prayers. What an extraordinary, kind and wonderful man. So let's just hope he keeps on fighting. And thank you again for hosting this discussion today. It's extremely good for us to start thinking about these issues earlier, because I think we're now all painfully aware of how serious a threat COVID-19 poses to us globally. And I think the message we've got to keep on hammering at this time, as we all think, understandably, quite nationally, is the only solution is a global one. I think the Secretary General said that really early in this process, and we hope that we keep on hearing it again and again. The UK is already committed, as some of you will know, about $670 million. We're focusing that at the moment on the WHO and on the vaccine, but more money will be forthcoming in the coming weeks and months. Because I think, and the key thing I think for this discussion is we need to look now, as many have said today, beyond this immediate health and medical crisis and think about the second order effects. We've got to think about the humanitarian impact. We've got to start to think now about the macroeconomic impact. And it was great to hear that from the World Bank, and the socioeconomic impact in these countries. We've got to start to think about how this is going to undermine our work on the SDGs. And we've got to start to think about, particularly in this context, the risks for fragility and the risks to peace and security. It was fascinating to hear the DSG talk about, and I think maybe Lazarus touched on this again, locusts moving through East Africa. We're thinking about the complicated build-up of factors here that need to be addressed and that we need to focus on. I think we just have three quick points to make. The first is to the UN leadership with us today. We wanted to say thank you. Oscar, you're sitting there. Please do pass this on. Your staff, the PBC teams, but also the country teams, peacekeepers all over the world are working very bravely in dangerous and challenging circumstances. So thank you for that. I think we'd like to know a little bit from you, perhaps Oscar, about how the UN is thinking about this question of prioritization. How are we doing the assessments that we need to do now to factor the potential knock-on risks from COVID in terms of fragility? How are you shaping your emergency response mechanisms, your horizon scanning, to understand that prioritization? It's something we're doing in London now, thinking country by country about where COVID will tip countries past a point of equilibrium. So it'd be very good to hear about that. Second point to the World Bank, we attach huge importance to the partnership between the IFIs and the UN, especially when it comes to ensuring conflict sensitive responses in fragile settings. I understand from what you're saying that operational delivery is the immediate priority right now, but we'd also appreciate to know what work you're doing to ensure common analysis that can inform this prioritization. So we don't want the UN thinking about this in isolation from you guys. So how are we going to join up that analysis on prioritization so we can move quickly to both offset some of the damage that COVID will do, but also to think about the immediate recovery after COVID. And my third point was really to all of you, to our colleagues in the PBC. This is the only intergovernmental body of the UN with an explicit mandate to consider the issues that cut across all the pillars of the UN system. The DSG talked about the nexus of peace and development. It's really important that we continue to push that agenda and inform that in this context, because it's clear that COVID-19, as we said, will have an impact across states, but also and across regions, but also across issues. And we need the UN to respond in that joined up way to that. So Marc-André, thank you again for your sentiments about the Prime Minister. Thank you all for the conversations today. And I look forward to hearing a bit more from them in answer to those questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your words. And thank you. So I'm going to the representative of the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for convening this meeting of the PBC, which can be indeed an extremely useful platform for discussions on how to address the complex fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic and help also resource mobilization. I'm speaking on behalf of the EU. Besides enhancing cooperation between the membership governments, UN actors, regional and sub-regional organizations, in order to forge a more coherent and action, we need to remain attentive also to civil society organizations, whose role is particularly important in this current crisis, as pointed out by the DSG. As the crisis affects our communities in socioeconomic terms, but also their longer-term stability and ability to recover. The challenge is unprecedented and calls for leadership and bold initiatives. And this is why, as stated by the High Representative Joseph Borrell, on behalf of the EU and its member states, we have strongly supported the UN Secretary General's appeal for an immediate global ceasefire. This global crisis, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can. That's fine. Yes.
Okay. So this global crisis can go either way. On the one hand, it is likely to exacerbate many of the challenges that the world was facing. But on the other hand, it may also bring opportunities for advances in peace processes and for multilateralism. And we have to be ready to seize these opportunities. In the first case, the pandemic can tip the balance from unstable peace to violent conflict. And the economic impact may rapidly translate into other threats to sustainable peace, from food security to escalation of pre-existing tensions in border areas, such as between Ethiopia and Kenya, where we can already see an increase in confrontations. And here we are in regular contact with the UN and the World Bank colleagues to prepare for post-disaster needs assessments to be carried out as part of the multilateral approach. However, the crisis can also create the conditions which would help us engage with conflict parties in talks that may provide opportunities for conflict transformation. And we believe that the PBC can play a key role in this context, raising attention and awareness on the particular threats that the pandemic is posing in such contexts. We cannot afford regional and international leaders to turn away from existing conflict and peace processes. Unfortunately, we already see this happening. For example, the tripartite summit in Nairobi aimed to diffuse escalating tensions between Nairobi and Mogadishu, Kenya and Somalia, had to be postponed for good reasons because of COVID-19. However, we should find innovative virtual ways to push the process forward without waiting for the pandemic to be defeated. We all know that an effective response will need to draw upon UN cross-pillar coherence in order to cover the full humanitarian development peace-building continuum. And it will also call for regional cooperation and regionalized responses, as well as innovative approaches to dialogue and mediation support. But there's another important element that we need to address, and that is the need to tackle disinformation. Disinformation which undermines public health policies, undermines confidence in public authorities, as the Deputy Secretary General was saying, undermines the trust in democratic systems and in the international organizations. We need to ensure effective, fact and science-based communications that reaches all facets of societies. Drawing on the lessons learned during the Ebola crisis, the EU is aware of the importance of easily accessible, trusted, and factual information in conflict zones. Let me conclude with a few words about the action we have taken as EU together with our member states. Today, we adopted an extremely significant whole-of-system targeted support package for partner countries, securing an amount of over 15 billion. The Team Europe approach, which gathers the EU, the European Investment Bank, the EBRD, and EU member states together, calls for solidarity and leadership, and promoting a coordinated multilateral response in partnership with the United Nations, through which a significant portion of our response will be channeled, and in partnership with international financial institutions, the G7 and the G20. The response focuses on the most vulnerable, including those in fragile and conflict-affected countries and regions, and their immediate health, humanitarian, and socio-economic needs. The overall aim is to ensure a coherent response that delivers swiftly, links up with the multilateral system, and is supported by adequate communication. We have developed already media and communication activities focusing specifically on conflict-prone countries and those that the WHO has identified as vulnerable. But even before the adoption of this package, the EU has been adapting all the instruments at its disposal to the new challenges caused by the COVID pandemic. In Somalia, for example, recent activities targeting health clinics in newly liberated areas will now equip these facilities to safely treat COVID-19 patients, and similarly also on the Horn of Africa. While considerable efforts will be needed on the African continent, we are not forgetting about fragile states elsewhere. In Central Asia, for example, the socio-economic repercussions of the pandemic risk not only halting, but even reversing an unprecedented period of reform and cooperation in the regions. And here, in close cooperation with the UN system, we're working to step up support to the health system and counter the wider societal repercussions. Similarly, in the Caribbean and South America, the EU is supporting the health sector to help address the immediate needs in the fight against the coronavirus outbreak. To conclude, we need to ensure that the longer-term effect of the COVID-19 crisis is not one of protectionism, closed borders, and increased surveillance, but a strengthened multilateral global partnership that is prepared to respond to global health crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for your generosity to the European Union. Ronaldo from Brazil.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Let me thank you for organizing this meeting. And let me thank you all, thank as well DSG, FAO, and the World Bank for very valuable inputs into our discussion. In the interests of time, I'm not going to delve into the particular situation of Guinea-Bissau, whose configuration I chair, without only just to say that we will be circulating in the coming weeks an update on the situation in Guinea-Bissau, focusing on the political context, the COVID-19 crisis, and the UNIOG-BIS transition. I would like to make some very, very brief comments, starting from the general to the specific. And the general is something that's been picked up by many speakers today, in the fact that we have to keep in mind that this is a unique crisis. This is not a crisis which has affected some members and others are in a position to help. This is a crisis which is affecting everyone. And this is a game changer in the fact that everyone is much more focused on their domestic situation, on their immediate crisis internally, than on the international context. And in this light, I can only applaud those members who have managed to keep an eye on both balls at the same time, and whilst dealing with their own particular situation, have found the energy and the political commitment to assist those more in need. But within this context, and it's a very unique context in which I don't, I think in living memory at least, I remember having seen a situation in which there is almost a global competition for medical supplies. And this gives you an idea of the gravity of the situation in which both domestically and internationally authorities are vying to put their hands on the scarce medical supplies that are available. But this is something for the short run, and I think James was spot on when he said that we have to keep our eye as well on what could be called the second wave, which is the humanitarian and the macroeconomic situation down the road. And I think we have to learn a lesson in the fact that in the same way as the immediate health issue cannot be dealt with by a country individually. It has to be a global response. And I think many have said this before. In the same way, the potential humanitarian and macroeconomic problems down the road will have to be tackled also as a global response, because no one is going to get out of this alone. So I think this is something we have to keep in mind. I take to heart in this context as well the FAO's call on the risks of disruptions to the supplies, global supplies of food. And just to call the attention of all those here that 24 ministers in Latin America and the Caribbean last week issued a declaration reaffirming their commitment to maintain stable supplies of food, both nationally and internationally. So we are making the effort in the region. Of course, we're going to depend on operation of stable logistics around the world to ensure that this is maintained, but the commitment is there on our part. Now, how does this translate, all this reflection translate into the PBC more specifically? And I think Jörg was very appropriate in saying that, we have to, this is one instance where first and foremost, we have to keep the interests or the priorities of the national government in first place. So this is something that has to be kept in mind. But what can the PBC do specifically to those countries that are in transition from conflict to development? And I think Kim Hiro was spot on when he said that, the PBC is not one more institution that should be vying for a coordinating role. I think there are other institutions or other bodies that can do this in a more appropriate way. What the PBC has to focus on, in my view, is on avoiding the risk that the particular needs of these transition countries are drowned out by the overwhelming demands that are coming upon the international system at this point. So what the PBC has to do is maintain its advocacy role, its awareness, building awareness for the particular situations of these countries and their specific vulnerabilities. And I think this is the key role that we have to address at this point. I cannot conclude without responding, Marc-André, to your initial comment on the issue that COVID-19 is a threat to security. This is a fine line we have to tread, and I think Mihiro was very, very fortunate when he addresses COVID-19 as an issue of human security. And I think that's something we can all agree on, much more than an issue of international peace and security. So I think we have to keep this distinction in our minds. Yes, there's a risk that COVID-19 can push particularly some of these transitioning countries back into a situation of threat to international peace and security. but we have to keep our eye on the main focus now, which is the issue of human security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronaldo, for your comments. And I now go to Gambia, to Lang, for the PR of Gambia. Lang, are you still there? We don't hear you.
Hello?
Yes, Lang, okay. Yes, now we hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And I also want to join others to thank the PBC and PBSO, and also DSG, Dominic, Frank, and Oscar. I think this is a very timely briefing, and then we are grateful to you, Mark. As you know, the Gambia is a country in transition, and the emergence of COVID-19 is an additional challenge. PBC has been with us for years, and we are confident that under your chairmanship, PBC will also continue to accompany us to fight COVID-19 and its aftermaths. So far, we are grateful that the numbers in the country are a little bit low, but that notwithstanding, the government has taken a number of measures, including closing the borders, the airport, and also declaring a public state of emergency for 45 days. And there is currently an active sensitization campaign in the country to enlighten people about the danger of the pandemic. Economically, we have already started feeling the impact because our Gambia relies on tourism and remittance a lot. Tourism contributes 20 to 22% of our GDP, and remittances also contribute about 20% of our GDP. Already we started seeing a decline in both, and then as a result of that, the economic growth has been scaled down to 2%. And there is therefore an urgent need for the country to have international help to enable us to move forward and also address the aftermaths, which will definitely impact on our businesses, especially. And then that will lead to need for more help for our young people who will be out of job. Having said that, I am confident that PBC can continue to help us because, as I said, you have helped us since the starting of our transition, and then we will continue to need your help to mobilize more resources so that we address both the pandemic and its aftermath. And then specifically, I want to talk about a few points or make few suggestions relating to the topic under discussion. And that is PBC should work with the UN and international partners as well as civil society to facilitate debt relief and cancellation for heavily indebted countries. Again, in my opinion, PBC should help engage and fragile countries to mobilize more resources to fight the pandemic and its aftermath. PBC, in its advisory role, should encourage the UN to focus more on providing a coherent and coordinated global leadership, of course, taking into account the unique specific situation of each country. The UN and partners should use this as an opportunity to support governments around the world to improve their health systems, especially governments in the developing world. And finally, Mark, I want to salute Canada and all other countries for providing the timely funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your kind word, Lang. And now, Geraldine, the PR of Ireland.
Good morning, colleagues. Good to be with you. I think this has been an excellent exchange this morning and very sobering indeed. Amina, it seems like a long time ago since we heard from Amina this morning, but I think she got it right in terms of an important point she made that's been picked up right across the block. We need to get our narrative right in our heads as well as actually in terms of the way we're acting. The Irish ambassador in Sierra Leone, I was glad to see Ali Kaba with us this morning, during the Ebola crisis was a woman called Sinead Walsh. She wrote a book that I went back to over the weekend called Getting to Zero. And I just recall one of her remarks in that, where she said, improving coordination in an emergency response sounds like a mundane and relatively unimportant task, but it's absolutely critical. And I think that's something that we need to keep in front of us. I agree with our colleague from Brazil that we're not the coordinating body as PBC, but really the capacity of the UN, to use Oscar's term, will hinge on each part of this system playing to its strengths. And I think, Marc-André, for the PBC, we need to keep our focus on where we actually bring a value added. During the Ebola crisis, one thing that we certainly took away from our collective experience there was that the community response on the ground is absolutely critical. I think that's an issue that's come home in a huge way to countries in the global north these days, where huge impact of the COVID crisis is being seen. It's a global crisis, it's not respecting borders, but the reality is it's the quality of the specific response on the ground that makes the difference. And I think our colleague Eric put it in very, if I may say, technicolor terms for us this morning in terms of what Burkina Faso was facing. This isn't just a viral issue. We're looking at food security, movement of people, and importantly, the question of instability. So let's, as PBC, as it were, not get distracted sometimes by the bigger picture, but keep focus on the ground, on the countries under our care, as it were. The second point I wanted to make is it's a sort of a warning, a collective warning to all of us. At the end of that book I referred to, Sinead said that the epidemic changed everything and nothing. And I think that would be a horrendous indictment of all of us if we face into this horrendous moment of COVID with that sort of prospect again. Behind this pandemic, we are hugely aware are the realities really of fragility and vulnerability. Our colleague from the World Bank, I thought this morning, got it right, where he said this is where high risk meets low capacity. And if we add to the baseline of humanitarian need, grinding poverty, inequality, if you add COVID to that, we know it's a lethal combination. So what we really need to do collectively in PBC, I think, is to keep faith with what our own mandate is and to use the unique assets. There are two things I just wanted to mention in that context. Where our peace builders are on the ground, and we know they are working not just with PBSO and through the PBF, but we need to make sure that the mediation and dialogue role that our peace builders play locally is continued and supported in concrete terms. The second point I want to make is that the element of trust becomes almost disproportionately important in the context of a crisis like this. We know that the trust people have in public institutions, particularly where public health is concerned, becomes fundamental to the capacity locally to respond. So while we need the macro response, and we certainly need the resources behind that, we also need to make sure that on the ground that we're still, through the PBF, the PBSO, working with our civil society actors and our mediators on the ground. Two final points. One, the role of the PBC proper. I of course agree with all those who said it's so disappointing that the Security Council isn't stepping up to the mark, and we know it's a complex and politically sensitive issue internally. I think we do, as PBC, need to keep that peace aspect in our mandate fulfillment, supporting the Secretary General directly, and his call for the global ceasefire we see as fundamental in doing that. And there I would also again remind ourselves that we can do that locally by working with civil society in some of our more challenging environments. Anna Karin and some others have raised the question of women. I just want to make 2 points. The broader gender issue is really important, and I always insist in any debate that we have in the PBC that we remember the role of women. 70% of health workers across the globe are women. So they're both the solution and the vulnerable part of our response to this. So I think we need to make sure that at a grassroots level, that women who are working in communities, particularly in African countries where grassroots women play a huge role in keeping societies and families together, that we keep the resources behind them now when they will be key to the response. And the second point I would make more globally is that I don't think there are that many women at the table as the stimuli are being discussed. The big stimulus packages are being discussed internationally. We need to make sure that the building back is gender-proofed and that the role of women in the next phase in the post-COVID environment is respected. The last point, Marc-Andre, just to say, I know a few people have touched on this, this really is a test for all of us in terms of our faith in the multilateral system. We have enormous trust in Thai. You said it very eloquently earlier, and the role of the WHO is critical. There's an Irishman there, Mike Ryan, who's the director, Dr. Mike Ryan, the director of the emergency response. He says no one is safe until everyone is safe, and that for us is at the heart of the multilateral response. I was delighted Silvio spoke about the Team Europe response today. 15.5 billion. Ireland was the first to put money behind the WTO response, and we're continuing to contribute, of course, to the UN response. But this really is the time to reinforce those institutions we have trusted ourselves over time. So thank you very much again, Marc-Andre. It's a very good discussion.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, and thanks for your kind comments. And now Luis from Guatemala.
Hello, good morning to everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
I would like to thank Marc-Andre for convening this meeting. I would like to thank the Deputy SG and the representatives of FAO, the World Bank, and the participation also in this meeting of PBSO. Certainly, as it was pointed out by some of the participants here, we are living in challenging times. We agree with the Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the interpretation that the current COVID-19 crisis is much more than a health crisis. It's a human crisis. And this coronavirus disease, of course, is attacking all societies. In this regard, we consider that it is important to address the special circumstances in which these countries are standing, witnessing that even developed countries are struggling to handle the pandemic. It is particularly important to consider that countries in or emerging conflicts will have to face more difficult challenges. Guatemala believes that the best way to act is through early prevention, which has helped us handle the situation at the best of our capacity and has driven us to reduce on a larger scale the expected rates considering our high vulnerability to the situation. While we discuss the impact of COVID-19 with peace building and sustaining peace activities, we believe that we need to take into account that the supply chain disruptions halting the manufacturing industry and the falling commodity prices, in particular oil, further compound the economic impact of the pandemic. This has rattled the financial markets, tightened liquidity conditions in many countries, created unprecedented flows of capital from developing countries, and put pressure on the foreign exchange markets. It is important to view the current pandemic as an opportunity for peace building and sustaining peace. Policymakers and COVID-19 coordination mechanisms should include expertise that brings in an analysis of fragility, risk, factors for conflict, and violence dynamics to understand the impacts of the lockdowns and other measures will have on risk factors for violence. I believe this is the core of the peace building commission right now, while recognizing that many of these measures have contributed to stop the spread of the coronavirus, it is also needed to highlight that we have to take measures to ensure the observance of human rights. We live in a particular moment in which Guatemala and all the countries, but especially the members of the PBC, we need to adapt to the current crisis. As PBC, we believe that we should be in the position to create the opportunities to discuss how can we contribute to address the many social and economic dimensions of this crisis, taking all people into account, women, youth, low-wage workers, small and medium enterprises, taking also into account that the Peacebuilding Commission's mandate should encourage that every country must step up with public, private, and civic sectors collaborating together. Guatemala agrees with the Secretary General interpretation. This moment demands coordinated, decisive, and innovative policy actions from the world's leading economies. At the same time, we agree on the interpretation of most of the members here of the UN Peacebuilding Commission that is necessary that we play a critical role in preventing the current virus and the current global health crisis from reversing peace gains. In that regard, we need to continue working for peace, human rights, development, and you can count with the support of my country in order to do so. I thank you.
Thank you, Luis, for these comments. And now I'll go to Mikhail from Slovakia. Mikhail, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Thanks very much, Marc-André, for getting us together and for the important briefings that we have received. Indeed, this is really an excellent opportunity for all of us to get together and to concentrate on this unprecedented situation and the role of the PBC and PBF, PBSO, and of course other associated activities. We have an important role to play. I will not repeat what others have already said, but I think we all agree that it is critical to use also the PBC platform today as an advisory capacity for the Security Council. Obviously, I fully agree with Mihiro in that context, but really as a unique platform that has to deliver even better in these challenging times. I really see as imperatives of the day the issues of coherence and coordination. We do speak a lot about the importance of coherence and coordination, but at these challenging times, as Geraldine has just said, they seem to be obvious, but unfortunately, they are not necessarily always taken for granted. So the unique platform and role that we can together play as PBC with PBF and PBSO is critical, and we need to redouble our efforts in the context of coherence and coordination, because you know, there are other imperatives of the day, and those being resilience and preparedness, and of course they are closely connected with what I have just mentioned. I will limit myself to three quick points. First one on partnerships. I think this current situation is really a big test to partnerships. It's good to see that many of the partnerships that we have already created work well, and today's briefing is a strong confirmation of that, with World Bank, with the important role that the World Bank plays in the fragility context and in the context of the nexus between humanitarian development and peace-related issues. But we need to continue working on the effectiveness of partnerships even further, with that particular element in mind, the element of coherence, coordination, and then resilience and preparedness in mind, because those partnerships, as well as regional, sub-regional cooperation, and that's my second point, are critical also for experience sharing, best practices in today's situation. We see it in our own situations, and of course we see it also in the various contexts that we have already touched upon earlier today. And really I would like to thank especially our colleagues from Sierra Leone, Burkina, the Gambia, for sharing with us their contributions. Really the experience sharing and best practices of regional, sub-regional coordination is critical. As I said, we see it in our own context. As we know, the virus spreads globally. There are no boundaries, no borders, and we need to work together, sharing not only the experience, but often also being able to share the material, the equipment, in some cases the production capacities. A lot of that has been happening in our own region. There is really a lot of close coordination between my country and our neighbors, and I think we need to promote the same in the regional and sub-regional context, where wherever the PBC can also contribute. My last point is something which has been mentioned but has not been mentioned in a specific way that I would like to mention it, and that is the critical importance and absolute necessity of the whole of government approach. This crisis teaches us that it is only through the whole of government approach that we can achieve credible and sustainable results. And when I'm speaking of the whole of government approach, I mean that we need to do better in making sure that the various sectors of government work more closely together. Of course, speaking of this, what comes to mind first is the health sector, but then there are important linkages with the security sector, the justice sector, also the education, science and research sector. The current situation really teaches us a big lesson that we need to further improve the whole of government approach delivery across the sectors. It is only through that we will be collectively able to deliver what is necessary for the socioeconomic situations in especially the most fragile countries. So I think collectively, also in the future, we could, as PBC, invest even more efforts into promoting these whole of government approaches, and we are ready to work with you on that, especially when it comes to the relationship between the health sector and the security sector, and how to make sure that the results are where we would like them to see. And let me conclude by saying that at a later stage, I certainly would welcome further opportunities for us to hear more about how the countries on the PBC agenda have been able to cope, and what interventions have already been made, and where maybe we will need to redouble our efforts. Similarly to what we have heard already from our colleagues Sierra Leone, Burkina, the Gambia. But this is something which will need to continue, and certainly we are ready to work with you, Marc-André, and with Oscar and others on making it happen. I will leave it at that. Thank you again.
Thank you very much,
and best wishes. Stay safe.
Thank you, Mikhail. Thanks for these comments. Now we have less than 20 minutes, and we have still quite a few speakers on the list, and Oscar wants to say a few words. I'll go first to the member states, and then we'll finish with Oscar. But like France, Anne, please. But could you please, may I ask all of the speakers, I'm sorry to do that, but it's been a very long, and a very good meeting, but long one. And I know there were some important interventions and stuff, but we just, if I can ask you to be brief. France, Anne.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Marc-André, and I want to commend you for convening this meeting and join others in expressing thanks to the DSG and Mr. Burgeon and Bousquet for their insightful and informative presentations. The COVID pandemic is a litmus test for the UN as we see it as the most destabilizing and probably the most global crisis that has hit us in decades. And we very much feel how globalized, but also how interdependent we are in this crisis. And I'd like to share four ideas, just four ideas on what the PBC can do to help in this context. First idea is that the PBC and the UN peacebuilding architecture as a whole have a role to play in preventing the COVID-19 pandemic from reversing the peace and security gains and from threatening our efforts to build and sustain peace. And this is why France fully supports the call of the Secretary General for a global ceasefire and for humanitarian access and to all. And this is also why we also support his vision and call for an integrated strategy for the day after, so that we all rebuild better. So the first idea is that the PBC should support his call for a global ceasefire and for his vision of rebuilding better. The second idea is that I agree that the PBC can serve and should serve as a platform of discussion to help foster a common and cross-cutting understanding of the crisis and of the UN role in response to it, as the DSG has eloquently said. And this is exactly what we're doing this morning. At the system-wide level, the PBC can help support PBSO, the PBF, and the UN country teams in country to promote an integrated approach of the response to the crisis in vulnerable countries and in particular in countries in conflict. And it would be useful if the PBC could express support for the role played by the RCs and that are, quite often in those vulnerable countries, double-hatted RCs, HCs, in providing effective coordination of efforts. And this is very much in the spirit of ensuring an effective humanitarian development nexus, as the ambassador of Japan at the beginning of the meeting had highlighted. And his idea of compiling and highlighting the good stories and good examples, I think, is a very good idea. The third idea, is that all this is particularly true for the countries and that are already covered by the PBC, which should be our priority. And I think we are looking at how to, be useful and not to and avoid duplication of efforts. For these countries, we can help them, put together an early and well-coordinated response to fight effectively the pandemic and to mitigate its destabilizing impact on the socioeconomic level. And more specifically, we have, as a PBC, a responsibility in helping those countries that are, on the agenda, and those that have been, in regular interaction with us. We can help them have the means for an early and accurate diagnosis of their situation, and also an accurate diagnosis of their needs. And I think it's our role to strengthen the ability to design response plans that are at the same time well adjusted to the local realities and in line and consistent with the regional and global strategies. So at country level, the focus on peace building is particularly important to ensure the resilience of peace processes and to mitigate the risk of increased social tensions. My country, France, is particularly concerned about the spread of COVID-19 in Africa, in particular in the Sahel, where we know that the population is extremely vulnerable. And this is why President Macron has proposed to launch an initiative to fight the COVID-19 in African countries with 4 components: health, humanitarian, scientific, and macroeconomic dimensions. So as I was saying, in the PBC, our priority should be to focus on the countries that we have been covering on a regular basis. And I'm thinking of the country-specific configurations, but also others with whom we've had regular dialogue, such as Burkina Faso, the Gambia, or Haiti. And I think it's been suggested that we could have country-specific meetings convening the relevant international actors so as to help accelerate the mobilization of resources for these countries and in designing their responses. And the fourth idea and final idea is that the PBC can help promote a response to the COVID crisis in which we collectively strengthen the efforts to mitigate the socioeconomic impact of the crisis, and most importantly, in which we make a collective effort in investing in building better, in building back better, in recovering better through green and sustainable strategies. The PR of Ethiopia said it very well. We have a responsibility in developing a positive and hopeful narrative and vision for now and also for the day after. So we need to invest in building back better, in recovering better, by strengthening health systems and their response capacity to stop this transmission. And this is for now and for the long run. But we also need to address in an innovative way the spread of the virus. And more importantly, as importantly, in mitigating the socio-economic impact by promoting stimulus packages and investments that are in line with Agenda 2030 and in line also with the Paris Agreement and all our climate action objectives. That's, I think, also very key, and the PBC can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. So now we have 10 minutes for 6 speakers, please. So Norway.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marcela, for convening us, and many thanks also to the other presenters. As the concept paper that was distributed highlights, the spread of the COVID-19 virus is certainly a potential driver for instability and conflict, and it is important that PBC is seized. So thank you again. Thanks also for previous interventions. With reference to what Ambassador Kaba from Sierra Leone and Ambassador Thiara from Burkina Faso said, it is of key importance that the PBC have a focus on country situations in the time ahead. I also strongly agree with what Ambassador Amayo was saying regarding the importance of safeguarding UN peacekeeping operations. In Africa, we can still be ahead of the curve, and Norway announced today, actually, in a meeting of the African Development Bank, a contribution to this organization's COVID-19 rapid response facility of approximately $84 million. Also, as Amina said in her introduction, this crisis has come on rapid and as a surprise. Norway has done its best to act quickly. We have disbursed more than 2.5 billion Norwegian kroners, that is about $250 million US, to the international fight against COVID-19. The bulk of these is to fund the CEPI, an organization that is rapidly developing affordable vaccines that all countries receive. We've also contributed substantially to the humanitarian plan, WHO, and others. And here, by the way, I also agree with Ambassador Taya of Ethiopia that we need to safeguard and support the role of WHO, and of course the important work being done by Dr. Tedros. A key message for Norway is, as also Amina was underlining, the coronavirus certainly did not respect national borders. And our response must be based on international cooperation, on good coordination and coherence, leaving no one behind. The COVID-19 crisis will put our ability to mobilize and ensure effective and cohesive responses at the country level to the test. And Norway is, as you know, a firm supporter of pooled funding as a strong driver of cohesion. And the Peacebuilding Fund has a strong record, as you know, in this regard. I'm therefore pleased to inform you that Norway has decided to provide 500 Norwegian million kroners, that's about $50 million US, for the next 5 years strategic plan for the PBF. And this represents about 30% increase to the fund. The PBF success in focusing on catalytic, quick impact projects and prevention should be safeguarded. And the temptation to spread thinly should be resisted in this difficult situation. Inspired by the satisfaction with the PBF and other pooled funds, such as the Ebola Fund, Norway has strongly advocated the establishment of a dedicated multi-partner trust fund for the corona epidemic. And we are very pleased that the Secretary General's COVID-19 Response and Recovery Multi-Partner Trust Fund is now established. This will enable a coherent response from the UN at the country level and to offer a humanitarian recovery and development nexus approach. The virus is already hitting countries with weak health systems. In some cases, the socioeconomic impact has already set in, even before the actual virus has materialized itself. The new multi-partnered fund will contribute to more coherent and effective efforts to build more resilient health systems. It will also provide funding to fight secondary effects of the crisis, such as unemployment, etc. Message that will be very important in a preventive approach. Now, speaking of prevention, I would like to highlight the situation for small islands developing states, SIDS. Many so dependent on tourism and trade, they have now had the carpet pulled out under them. And here I agree with Ambassador Costa, by the way, of Brazil. If not addressed, this would have dire consequences. The multi-partner trust fund that the UN has established will also be available to them. I strongly urge other member countries to contribute to this fund. Norway has made a first pledge of 150 million Norwegian kroners. Now, in finalizing, the situation we are in is a bit like climbing up a hill, where when we get to the top, we'll face and see a larger mountain in front of us. There will be strong economic consequences and strong budget restrictions. Now, the UNDP administrator Achim Steiner briefed the board of the funds and the programs last week, where he emphasized the organization's rapid response, tailor-made approaches geared to each country's unique situation, and the quick reallocation of funds. Now, what makes this possible? It's core funding. Core funding allows the UN organizations to be flexible, responsive, to channel resources where they are needed the most. In this difficult situation that we are finding ourselves, we must avoid a bilateral beauty contest, funding that will only reach some and which will not provide for effectiveness and coherence. Now, Norway will do its share. In spite of a population of 5 million, we are one of the largest donors of core funding to the UN system, and we will remain committed to funding, to the core funding. Timely and predictable and early disbursement of core contributions to the UN organizations is essential, especially now that the demand on the multilateral system is surging. Norway encourages others to increase their co-funding. This is the key to multilateral approach, securing coordination and coherence and leaving no one behind. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, and thanks for Norway for your remarks and leadership. Colombia DPR, I think, let's go, Ambassador. We're doing very badly on time.
Thank you, Marc-Andre. I thought that you have forgotten me. How are you? I'm good. I'm fine. And hello to everyone here. Well, let me start. Thank you for convening this meeting. I think it's very convenient at this time. And I would like to start making some very short points, since we have a limited time here. And first, I think it's very important at this moment and a comprehensive approach and comprehensive support from all the UN to countries. And I underline here the comprehensive support, since all agencies, all funds, and everybody here at UN should be involved, including the Security Council. It's very important, the Security Council, the message of the Security Council sends at this moment to international community. Also, we welcome all the efforts from the Secretary General, and especially we welcome his appeal for the global ceasefire around the world. And I think it's very important, that call from the Secretary General. The second point here is that the COVID-19 is affecting all countries. However, what we see is that the global south is particularly affected and strongly affected now and also in the long term. There is a interesting article from Jan Bremer in which he shows some different curves of the COVID-19 in China, Europe, US, and emerging markets, and especially the global south, and how the global south is the one who is going to be more affected in the short, medium, and long term. And basically what the Undersecretary General mentioned about the capacities of the health systems, the infrastructure, the weakness of some economies. So that's why what we want to indicate at the third point is that we have to look not only the short term, which is how we attend and mitigate the emergency, but also we have to look at the long term, the recovery. And this is a call to look at the day after. What is going to happen the day after? And here also the PBC has a very important role to play in the short and also in the long term, in the day after. And here I think we have to look at the most vulnerable populations, the most vulnerable countries, and specifically, we have to pay attention to women and children during this crisis. In the global south, I think there are three main areas we have to look at: the health systems, the food security, institutions, how we strengthen institutions, and also the economies, small and medium enterprises, how to protect employment. And here, I think the World Bank and other multilateral development banks can play a very important role for the economies. And finally, let me say that I think all of us, we agree on some common principles as the shared responsibility, more transparency, more openness, and more solidarity among countries. At the end of the day, the way out is based on a common action, more cooperation, and more solidarity among all of us. Thank you very much, Marc-Andre.
Thank you, Andres. Thank you very much. Courtney for the United States.
Ambassador, I think she actually had to leave.
Okay, so sorry, I didn't know that. My apologies. The representative of Morocco.
Hello.
Oui.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. My ambassador apologizes. He is still in a parallel VTC meeting with the capital, and he charged me to deliver his intervention today. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for your engagement in these difficult times and for the initiative of convening this meeting on the Peacebuilding Commission on a very important subject. I'll be brief. Regrettably, in addition to its well-known ravages on the human health, the COVID-19 pandemic has the particularity of exerting far-reaching damages on the governmental, economic, and societal fabrics of all countries, especially developing and conflict-affected countries. And this is where meetings such as today's find all their relevance and significance. The global nature of the pandemic dictates from the international community to act in unison and to work towards an integrated and coordinated response. In this regard, my delegation wishes to commend the proactive engagement and leadership of the Secretary General of the United Nations, who came up with concrete steps to overcome and mitigate the damages of the pandemic on the multilateral level. In these times of crisis, the PBC is also more than ever before called to assume a pivotal role to pull its advisory role, namely to the Security Council, as well as its unique ability to act as a hinge within the United Nations system to help, in full respect of national ownership and priorities, countries doubly affected by conflict and post-conflict related challenges, as well as the COVID-19. This is also a concern that has to be duly reflected in the process leading to the UN Peacebuilding Architecture Review. And to conclude, Mr. Chair, allow me to mention a few elements regarding the situation in the Central African Republic. The government took several measures to address the current COVID-19 pandemic, such as closing schools, bars, and restaurants, limiting movements in Bangui and in the rest of the country. MINUSCA is heavily engaged in support of national authorities together with WHO to fight the pandemic. President Touadéra publicly thanked MINUSCA for its support. Regarding the car configuration, we are in contact with the DPO and MINUSCA to assess how we can best support their efforts. And finally, Mr. Chair, the car configuration will organize in the coming weeks a meeting on elections, particularly to address the funding gap. All the members of the configuration will be Commission will be informed on this meeting as soon as we have a better sense of the impact of the COVID-19 on the electoral process. Giving you back the floor, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci pour votre intervention. Le representative of the Republic of China. Hello, are you there? Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, please go ahead. We cannot hear you now, but we could a few moments ago.
Okay, thank you, President. Thank you for organizing the meeting and during this special time, and it's very important. The unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic is threatening the health, safety, and the well-being of human people. The fastest spreading outbreak has not only serious undermined the global public health security, but also brought enormous negative impacts in economic, financial, and political areas. In the face of this common crisis for humanity, no country can stay immune. China supported the UN systems, WHO in particular, in playing the central leading role in the global response to the pandemic. Peacebuilding Commission is an advisory body authorized by both General Assembly and the Security Council with advantage in areas of political security and development. During this special time, PBC can play an important role on addressing the impacts of COVID-19. Let me share the following points. First, all the measures should be based on the national ownership. Each host country has its own character and the difficulty to address pandemic spread. PBC should provide tailor-made solutions based on the requests from the host country. Second, partnership is an useful tool and a platform we encourage to enhance the partnership between PBC and the regional and sub-regional organizations. Third, all initiatives and the proposals of the UN should create synergy. We support all conflict states and the relevant party to respond to the appeal of a Secretary General for global ceasefire and encourage all member states to join the global humanitarian response plan. We call on the UN bodies, including PBC, to help member states to fight against COVID-19 within their respective mandates and play their respective role and synergize their efforts. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, China has mobilized the whole nation, set up a collective control and the treatment mechanisms, and activate openness and transparency. We have put up a strenuous struggle and made tremendous sacrifices. Now the situation in China is moving steadily in a positive direction. Life and work are quickly returning to normal. At the same time, China provides assistance to and shared experience with more than 100 countries in total. Guided by the vision of building a community with a shared future for humankind, China will be more than ready to provide assistance where we can to other countries and help the worldwide after the storm. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. And now I'll make the last speaker that I have on my list that I can accommodate is Fatima, the permanent observer of the African Union. Fatima, sorry, I didn't know you were there. So go ahead, please. Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the floor and the opportunity to speak. I will try my possible best to collapse my 2 pages into 1 paragraph. I know we're restricted for time, but really just to say it's great to see a lot of familiar faces looking well and staying healthy. I'd like to start by, first of all, thanking the DSG and the various speakers. Oh, so sorry. I would just like to very quickly mention a few points from the perspective of the African continent. There's no doubt, and it's been mentioned by several of the speakers, that the pandemic is going to obviously negatively affect many of our fragile, conflict-prone, and climate-affected regions. I'd just like to share with you very briefly some of the proactive measures that the AU has taken in response to the pandemic and also to support AU member states. Firstly, very briefly, the Bureau of the AU Assembly Heads of States and Government, which is chaired by South Africa, has convened 2 meetings so far to underscore the importance of having a continental response to the pandemic. We've also established a COVID-19 response fund to provide continent-wide support, including support to enhance the work of the Africa CDC. There was also an agreement to establish continental ministerial coordination committees on health, finance, and transport to facilitate a comprehensive continental strategy. I won't go into too much detail on that. At the level of the Commission, we've also established a business continuity plan in order to ensure the functioning of our various organs. The Africa CDC has also been providing capacity building and regular updates to our member states and their daily updates on the status of the various member states in terms of the pandemic. And we've also procured and distributed a number of medical relief materials, including those that have been contributed to us. And most importantly, we continue to advocate for global solidarity. You'll agree with me that never before has the world been more interconnected by a global crisis such as this one, and the need for collective solidarity and collective efforts has never been more important. Now that said, and in moving forward, just to make very brief recommendations. First, I'd like to make just 3 points. First, in order to mitigate the impact of the pandemic and to ensure that the gains of the countries and the regions under consideration of the PBC are not lost, we recommend that there's an adaptation of the peacebuilding missions to support these countries and the regions in line with this. And we believe that there's an opportunity with the review of the UN peacebuilding architecture and an integration of the impact of the pandemic itself. Secondly, in the broader sense, I'd just like to reemphasize the call that was made by the SG for the global ceasefire. Of course, this was supported by the AU. There's this need for further political support for the enforcement of the ceasefire and effective monitoring of arms embargoes. In line with this as well, the AU Bureau itself has called for the lifting of economic sanctions on affected AU member states. And we will also continue to galvanize international support for Africa's response to the pandemic, particularly through contributions to the COVID-19 Response Fund, and also concessionary loans to member states and quick impact projects. Finally, Chair, I would like to conclude by fully supporting the comment made earlier by Ambassador Taye, and reiterated by a number of other ambassadors by quoting the AUC chairperson, and this was also supported by a number of heads of states and government through tweets, which I'm sure many of you have followed today. And I quote, "We fully support the work of the World Health Organization led by Dr. Tedros, and our focus should remain on collectively fighting COVID-19 as a collective, united global community." Thank you once again for the opportunity, and I wish you well.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Is Oscar still there, or he had to leave? I know he had to leave, I think. Is Oscar there?
I am still here, Ambassador. And if I may, just very, very quickly to thank you for your leadership and this, I think, one of the most important meetings that this Peacebuilding Commission has ever had, not just because of the numbers, but the substance and the quality of the many statements we just heard. We were asked a specific question regarding what is it that we're doing differently and how are we adapting? And James actually brought up quite a lot of very important points. So I would like to speak, sorry, to this issue of coherence. The Peacebuilding Commission is, par excellence, the member state platform to drive member state coherence, but certainly to help the UN respond in a coherent manner. And here, what the DSG was referring to, the breaking of the silos between development actors, peace and security actors, humanitarian actors, and human rights actors, becomes particularly important because all of these actors are needed in unison to be able to help governments and societies have effective responses to COVID-19. So to that effect, let me just say, just before this meeting, I was in another meeting where USG De Carlo, USG Lacroix, and others were briefing all the missions, peacekeeping operations, special political missions, on how we are adapting to be able to stay, to deliver and support the governments and the peoples that we serve. It's important to stress that I cannot tell you how many meetings there have been across the system that is actually resulting in this type of common and this sort of solidarity within the UN system, if you will, to really come together in this critical hour of need. We need to be efficient, we need to be effective, we need to be fast, and we need to be super flexible. And here is where the Peacebuilding Commission can play a fundamental role. The biggest mistake that could happen here is the multiplication of funding instruments that actually start driving again the silos that we have been so hard working in bridging. So I think on the point of financing, because it has come up repeatedly, it is extremely crucial to well define what each instrument is bound to be delivering so that the complementarity between the different instruments add up for those resident coordinators or those SRSGs that are in for the UN being the focal point in terms of bringing the system together to support government capacity, particularly in conflict, fragile states where those capacities are already extremely weak. So how we come together and deliver effectively and support with others becomes fundamental here. And here I would like to say that we have been working very avidly to ensure that there is no conflict between this new multi-partner trust fund that is being set up, the functions that the Peacebuilding Fund, which many of you referred to, are still up and running, and maybe even today more than ever, if we want to reverse and prevent relapses, if we want to build on a lot of the social cohesion and a lot of the trust building and a lot of the reconciliation and inter-community dialogue and trust, this is the time that we need to ensure that each instrument is adequately financed. We need an immediate humanitarian response, so that is happening. We need an immediate response on the socioeconomic, and that is also happening. We also need the peace building part here. So I would just like to make sure that in the overall effort that we ensure that we are making sure that the system as a whole can deliver coherently. And here, let me state that we have issued instructions to all the members, all the country teams and all the resident coordinators working in over 47 countries, that this is the time now to reorient, to reprogram with a peace building lens, if you will, those aspects that can help in the building better tomorrow by ensuring that the social protection mechanism, that the responses that are being designed are being done precisely with a conflict sensitive lens. Because again, as we learned from the past Ebola response mechanism, how we communicate, how we design, how we implement becomes fundamental, whether social cohesion and the social contract gets strengthened or weakened. So on this, just let me give you the points that we're stressing in our programming from the fund. One is to support the government's crisis management and communications capacity. This becomes particularly important as, we were just talking about narratives, and narratives become fundamental here. Facts, science, solidarity, trust, avoid stigmatization, avoid xenophobic impulses, avoid the blaming of others becomes fundamental here. Again, as we saw with the Ebola crisis. The second point is to ensure that we have inclusive processes, that we bring the communities who are going to be the most affected into the dialogue, into the design of a lot of these programs that are being launched. We need to keep an eye on the issues of grievances and horizontal inequalities. The distinction between center and periphery will be multiplied many a times. And the dynamics across borders, again, this requires a certain solidarity that goes beyond borders. And yet we are seeing a progressive series of lockdowns that could have impacts on the peace building dimension. The inter-community social cohesion aspects are being supported. Women and youth become critical implementation partners. And as we are speaking, we have launched new appeals. And we have modalities, as you know, we've briefed the Peace Building Commission many times on the very fast, flexible way that the Peace Building Commission fund is, with support of the Peace Building Commission, can strengthen the capacity of communities to respond to this pandemic. So we're not focusing on the health system. We have the FAO, we have the technical specialist agencies, but more on the community response, on taking the good messages and translating them into action. And last but not least, the important support to the call for the ceasefire. We are starting to get from SRSGs and many resident coordinators in countries where some of the warring parties have decided to step forward in a constructive way. They are looking for immediate support on these ceasefires. Unfortunately, through the Peace Building Fund, we have started already addressing some of those requests. So all of this to say that I think, the Peace Building Commission, particularly, and we have actually, as part of today's group, some of the independent eminent persons group who are working on the peace building architecture review, that much of what needs to be changing in order to rebuild better and to bring issues of resilience and social coherence are being factored in real time in the way that the Peace Building Fund has already informed, is changing, and is deploying full force ahead. So just to reassure everybody, and the last point, because I'm going to this meeting with the World Bank, we are providing resident coordinators with a unique financing stream that allows them to work on analysis, data, and response mechanism jointly with the World Bank and the IMF, who have been the two critical instruments for rapid funding at scale. So our resident coordinators, to work better with the World Bank and to help governments absorb and deliver the aid, are receiving support at technical assistance advisory services that are being organized virtually as we speak. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Oscar. Very well done.
Okay, I have 3 mad experts apparently in the room, so I'll give you the floor, but 1 minute each. We are over time by 15, 20 minutes. I'm doing my best to manage this, guys. I'm in the Zoom thing. I'm not sharing the meeting per se, so that's a lesson for us. So that when the person is chairing, we need absolutely to be chairing the meeting technically with Zoom. But I'm going to give you 1 minute, and please help me out here. So I'm going to start with Germany, then the US and Peru, but 1 minute each, please. And I'm going to give away my right to make my national statements. I want to be nice, guys, but be also nice. It's our first meeting. It's tough to manage, and it's a very important topic. And I gave precedence as much as I could to the PRs because there was a lot of PR present. We had more than 25 speakers. It's not easy to do. Please understand that. And I ask for your collaboration. 1 minute each. Thank you. Let's start. Germany.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ambassador, for giving me the floor. And I promise I'll be very brief. Apologies from my ambassador. He was stuck in the Security Council meeting, so he could not be here. So he sends his regards. He wanted to be at this very important meeting. We thank you for organizing the briefing, also the PBSO. We feel it's very important that the PBC gets a grip on this crisis, and so we would like to thank the briefers. Crucial that we had the FAO and World Bank here, and getting that nexus right is very important. We would like to add our voice to the previous speakers, agree with many of the things that have been said, and would like to quickly point out four bullets. One, COVID-19 is a stress test for the UN and the UN reform. So what Oscar just said, the RCs and the country teams can now prove that they're operational in this crisis mode and work in an integrated and coordinated manner. So coherence is key, and that's been stressed by many others before. Two, the PBC, on the role of the PBC. This crisis and this crisis mode requires a strong role for the PBC, especially with functions as a platform and as a convener. So we should consider giving the PBC a role in sharing best practices, lessons learned, and mitigation measures. And mobilization of resources and expertise is another important role that has been mentioned before. Third, with a view to the advisory role to the Council, we think that the PBC should ensure that in those cases where we do provide advice to the Council, we need to now include the impact of COVID-19 on peacebuilding efforts in a practical and integrated manner, and that such advice points out the interlinkage of the existing and the new challenges. And lastly, fourth, on the PBF, the PBF should use every opportunity to make its projects COVID-19 proof. That means pandemic preparedness, if applicable, mitigation and pandemic response should be integrated into existing windows of the PBF, such as cross-border cooperation and pertinent PBF projects. And that's something that Oscar has just mentioned. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dan from the US, you don't say thank you to anyone. You just give me your points. Go.
Thanks, Ambassador. We thank all parts of the UN system for combating the spread of the virus. We fully support the Deputy Secretary General's call to break down silos, as well as these will hamper all lines of effort to respond and recover. We know that completely transparently sharing public health data and information with the international community and lessons learned are key ways to help international partners and institutions mitigate the impact of COVID-19 right now. For our part, the United States is leading the world's humanitarian and health response to the pandemic. We remain the largest donor to the World Health Organization, the UN Children's Fund, the World Food Program, and significant portions of COVID-19 response funding here in the United States. Secretary Pompeo announced today an additional $225 million in health, humanitarian, and economic assistance to further boost response efforts worldwide. The United States remains focused on humanitarian concerns and the importance of coordinated efforts, including the work of the Commission and other UN entities, and we look forward to working together to respond to the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you. Now, Peru.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be very brief. I would like to take this opportunity to refer to the 3 guiding questions included in the concept note. First, we know the substantial contributions that the PBC can make in close coordination with respective UN country teams in the work of gathering and systematizing the public health needs in each of the country-specific configurations. Having a database would greatly facilitate a more focused and effective response that could contribute to efficiently allocate financial resources for international cooperation. Second, we consider important to take advantage of the valuable experiences and lessons learned in the African continent in recent years in the fight against diseases such as Ebola. These efforts are likely to be consolidated into a good practices document, which could guide the current response to COVID-19 in the country-specific configurations. Another issue would be strengthening the interaction with civil society in close coordination with local authorities in order to gather first-hand information on the population needs in the COVID-19 context that could be accompanied by massive information campaigns to contain the disease, in whose design and implementation the PBC could be involved. We believe that other action areas of the PBC should be indeed adjusted to each country-specific configuration reality. For instance, it is crucial PBC to monitor compliance of roadmaps of electoral processes scheduled in countries such as Liberia, Burundi, Burkina Faso, and the Central African Republic, trying to avoid its postponement due to COVID-19 implications, or in any case, said postponement to be for the shortest possible time. We also know the need for the PBC to contribute to the efforts to ensure the safe and orderly return of the thousands of refugees and displaced people from countries such as CAR and Burundi due to their special vulnerability to the COVID-19, and also to promote conditions for adequate social reintegration. That's it, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Humberto. You did very well. Thanks for your comments. And so that brings us to the end of the speakers. I won't give I think many of the things that Canada would have said have been mentioned by many. And this is, I'll take another time at some point to mention. I think we're all probably late for other things that we have to do. One thing I want to be doing, for me, I think, and also what we'll do is we'll sit down with Oscar and the two vice chairs from Japan and Colombia to actually digest everything that was said, because the discussion was very rich. The suggestions were very, very good. And there's quite an alignment of where people want us to go. Some of it is different than the peace building has been a little bit so far. So it's going to take a little bit of, I think we should, we have to tread carefully, and we have to make sure that, it's appropriate, and it's useful. For me, the test is it useful, and are we crowding a space? But many comments were made, on the narrative and on the information sharing that would enhance the coordination and the likes, and then the advisory role with the UNSC, and then some specific issues like I thought I was the common thread by the comments made by the countries that are at the forefront of it in Western Africa or in the Sahel mentioned the economic and the social issues, and I think and the food issue, the social unrest, the jobs, the unemployment for young people. We just need to think about all of that and see how we could deal with it within in a useful way with the peace building. So I thank you very much. One thing I will make as a comment, for me, I think it's part of my role. I didn't do that on the peace building because it was not, I thought it was not appropriate at this time, but I'm doing it with Courtney Ratney as the chair of the group of friends on financing, and we've invited all member states on Friday at 10 o'clock, I think, a Zoom call with the number 2 of the World Bank, the number 2 of the IMF, the number 2 of the UN, Amina, and I think someone from the OECD. I think it is an all-star roster panel that will actually talk about, because countries are a lot asking, what is being done, what is accessible as assistance, where do I go, what do we do? And I think partners are looking also to make sure that there's coordination and all of that, and that silos are talking to each other. So that was our contribution by Courtney and I to the debate. And then, so we're doing that on Friday. It's going to be, I'm so sorry that it's on Good Friday. It was the only time where everybody was available. It's going to be led by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada and the Minister of Foreign Affairs or Finance of Jamaica. So it's actually going to be, and it's going to be the first probably a series of meeting where after that we're going to go maybe more by regions or by type of needs, because to make sure that we understand what is accessible and how it works. So that's the comment I wanted to make. So I just want to thank you all. Thanks for your patience. It was too long of a meeting. Next time, I think I'll cut the speakers. I'll ask you to be a little bit shorter. But I thought today was very important to get it out. I'm sorry that was a bit of a mix with the PR, DPRs, and everybody, that I usually follow my strict rule of PRs. It's just that I didn't see, I was not seeing who was as the next speaker. I had to get the list via another phone by someone else. So we have to arrange that. So sorry for that technical glitch. I did my best, and my apologies if I didn't do it perfectly. And so thank you very much, everyone. We're all in this together, and we all have to help each other. But the best thing about today was to hear all of you and to see that you're all in great shape. And let's keep thinking about Martin. Thank you. Ciao. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Marc-André. Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Ciao.
Great. Ciao.